got a problem with my neighbor and reaching into their pocket and pulling out
Just
$700 and crumpled hundreds, or Sohum 20s as they call them, and putting it on my desk and saying, can you do that? I'm like, yeah, okay. It's just
is that what you dealt with a lot of the time was neighbor disputes?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's the big one.
Easement and water fights, and the fights over water. When there's like plenty of water for like about 5 households in the spring, there are what the arguments about. But it's
Yeah,
just
it's not a secret.
and then out of town attorneys. It's so funny because they'll like think that they've got some negotiating advantage on me, saying I've got evidence that your client grows pot for a living. I'm like, ooh, gee,
You don't
yeah,
say.
yeah, really. I mean, it's like, you know what? Probably your client does too, but
Yeah, that's probably a safe assumption, especially
yeah,
Garberville area.
if they're living out out there, they're either telecommuters, writers, or well, back then, not even telecommuters. It wasn't even an option. So, it just was, yeah. It's so funny though when they're from out of town. I think it's like a big deal, and it's like, and I said, you know what, judges don't even want to hear about it unless it's specifically relevant to the case.
Is that still a lot of your clientele now where it's legalized? Has it
I
died
mean,
off a little bit?
I never did the marijuana stuff. I left the marijuana defense to other people, Ed Denson and the rest down there, down that way. But fights over easements, subdivisions that were drawn without the help of attorneys or surveyors sometimes, and deeds written out in crayon, and somehow the recorder's office recorded it anyway. And I mean, just bizarre things.
Do you want a water or a beer or soda or anything?
That
We've got a
sounds
ton of
good.
refreshments.
What's that?
Uh,
Well, let's see what you got.
There's cold beer in the fridge. There's also water in the fridge. And then we've got, I mean, whiskey, we've got vodka.
Let's see. Oh, wow, what do you recommend here?
I'm a whiskey guy. There's a bottle of Crown down there at
Is
the
that what
bottom.
this is?
Yep, there's a fresh one down there too. Oh, we got some of that.
I'll take that. Where's the
We're
glass?
gonna go in. There's two. There's some red Solo cups right there on the
Okay,
bottom.
great.
Oh wow. Okay, we're going in on this one.
Yeah, I'm not going back to work, so
Oh, might as well. 5 o'clock somewhere.
yeah,
I didn't realize it's been what 4 or 5 months since we did our last one.
probably. Yeah, I think so.
I
It
want
was
to
it
say
was it wasn't long after the spring election, I think, right?
yes. I want to say August, September, maybe.
Where do you want your bottle?
You could just. There's a trash right there on the left. You could set it down.
Um, yeah, right. It was after well, it wasn't a recall election, but after the whole thing with Karen Paz Dominguez, just which I mean, we're not even learning yet what the consequences of that are. I think we're still losing millions every year. There was supposed to be a follow up with the state, and I didn't see anything reported about it. Just
I know that there was pretty sizable settlement, right? She cashed
um,
out.
she cashed out with
Can you pull that? Just you want to
Oh yeah,
be
sure.
right up on that
Yeah,
sucker.
she cashed out, so to speak, with oh, what was it? She got her wages till the end, and the thing was that she qualifies for. I believe one of the issues was she did qualify for the retirement proceeds as long as she made it to July. And but it was, she was going to work straight through towards the end, but then the board just had it. They wanted her out. And so they made it a little bit. I mean, I think she got a little bit of extra money, other than that, but she could have been there doing it anyways, but she was able to collect it without having to do, a lot of work.
Now I
Just
don't remember. Where did you fall on that? Were you on
no,
her side? Were you
no, I
against?
supported her. I supported her because I caught the county just the people. See, I would say that I'm a little bit critical. If I'm critical of her, it's her political effectiveness. She's about as effective as Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. Just but and there were things where I was like telling her, because the state was telling her just sign anything, I don't care, but she couldn't do that from her concept of it. And I was just like saying, just do it, get it, and then if it turns out that the report is inadequate, you can come back later and say, see, I told you so. But
Which is what we would all want. You wouldn't want to attach your name to something that you wouldn't stand by.
exactly, exactly, and that's what she didn't wanna do because it's just the stuff wasn't being done right, and the interesting thing is that the state, auditor controller didn't release their report on it until afterwards, and I I read it, I see it as an indictment of the county, not her, and, and if they're right, we're losing millions every, year, and the county was supposed to do a follow-up, but the local media wanted to even discuss it.
Shocking,
Yeah,
right? Who
it
would have
just
thought that?
yeah, I mean, I don't know what if it's like the I mean, I was able to get my piece, published on Redheaded Black Belt. They were, but, she can only do so much. So it was, because they were outright the county people were outright lying about, there was this whole flap about the Arcata house homeless, forget what it was, and they weren't getting paid, right? And they were blaming her. They were supposed to there were $500,000 in invoices that they were expecting to get paid from, and so, um, Ryan Burns was writing up an article, based on, well, yeah, what's going on? Why is it taking so long? Well, it turns out they hadn't even they got to the oh god, I'm forgetting what the name of the agency is, the county agency, and it never got out of it. They never were submitted to her. So she showed me they all of a sudden when she calls up the woman at the nonprofit, she says, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen your invoices except for that one months ago that we had to go to the board for and to get it paid, but I haven't seen them. And I think that woman then called up the agency and started, read them a riot act saying, what's going on here?" And then all of a sudden, the night before Ryan Burns' article that slammed her for it was to be posted, um, all of a sudden like 30 of the invoices magically appeared on the queue that she's supposed to do, and she showed it to me, said, this is the queue. When they come in, we deal with it. And all of a sudden she had it, and she actually moved it to the top of her list. And she normally takes them in order, but she actually made sure that those all got paid right away. No coverage of the fact that they just mysteriously appeared on it. I tried to contact, the Lost Coast Outpost on it. They were doing the coverage. Anyway, it's just, um, it was kind of sad, and so I published that my thoughts in um, the Redheaded Black Belt, and got no response from anybody. None,
It
zero.
seems like she got a bum deal.
Oh my
I
god,
mean,
it
from the
got a
information
horrible
I had her
deal.
on the podcast and we talked for a few hours, and
Yeah.
it's seems like they just wanted her out.
They wanted her out. I mean, okay, there were things that she was really stubborn on,
Mhm.
I mean, but so I'm not
But
going to say
stubborn
it
for a
was
good reason.
right. Definitely. But I'm not going to say it's all on them, but but they lied. And I knew they lied because they lied I knew they weren't above lying. They lied through their teeth during the Measure K campaign, just saying that the Measure K was going to cost 300,000 a year with all these bogus estimates and stuff. And so anyway, oh, could I get one of those ice
Yeah,
cubes?
absolutely. That's
Thanks.
another grab it.
All right. The so yeah, it was. I mean, they when Rex Bone said, "Yeah, let's find out how much this thing is going to cost," and they started making stuff up as to what it was going to cost, and so anyway, it was they lied about that, so I knew they'd lie about anything. But anyway, that's all under the bridge. It's done, but
Now, are you worried at all about Cheryl in that role? 'Cause
No, I
what
think
I from
Cheryl actually means well and wants to do
but
what
what
she
I've heard
can.
is that there's gonna be a chance that she's just gonna be more willing to play ball, that
Yeah,
she's gonna rubber
yeah.
stamp what Paz Dominguez might not have.
That's her history, but I don't, and I don't think she even wanted to be there. I think they came and said, "Wait, you got to run," because the guy that was running against her had less experience than she did, and so I don't think she even wants to be in there. I think she's ready to was ready to stay retired, and they
Got pulled back in.
got pulled back in. Yeah, so I mean, as far as I know, and even Karen thought she's basically a good person, but probably just will get along because not trying to make waves. She,
That's what scares me, the go along to get along
yeah,
is a problem.
it's a problem, and who knows if she'll even be in there the whole term. They might be grooming somebody else. So anyway, it just but it's yeah, I was really disappointed in that, in that, and in the media coverage of it. Most of the media, not all the media, but most of the media.
Well, the media coverage story is national now. The
Yeah,
problem with just completely leaving information out, not covering subjects that should be covered,
yeah,
just the complete lack of
mm.
hard-hitting journalism, which is gone.
Yeah. We aren't having a whole lot of it. I'm mostly impressed with redheaded black belt. Been for a long time. I don't know what happened to all the guys over at Lost Coast Outpost. They used to be Mavericks. I mean, I remember Ryan Burns when he was with the North Coast Journal. I mean, they were terrified of him. They wouldn't even, people Leo Lancey and and Estelle Fennel and them. They wouldn't even interview with him. Maybe maybe that's the thing. Maybe they'll do it now. I don't know. It's
Well,
just
that the ease of access is what has been explained to me. That once you get inside and you have access to these people, why risk that by asking difficult questions? Why upset them?
yeah. I don't know. I can't speculate on it. I mean, I'm not going to try to get into people's head, but I just was really disappointed in the coverage. Anyway, so are we started or?
Yeah, well, oh, we're
Oh,
going.
we're
We're
going. Oh,
going.
I didn't know that.
We're
Okay.
live, rolling start,
Oh,
baby.
okay. All right.
So how is life? How's the Redwood Wonk?
Redwood Wonk is fun. We do it, once a week.
You guys are plugging right along.
Yeah, we're getting more audience members and the rest, and it's a fun job. It's a little bit different from my KMUD programming.
Now, what do you do for KMUD?
Um, I have a once a month talk show, All Things Reconsidered. Did that for a while. The statute of limitations from NPR show is long since it's satire anyway. So, but the and I've done that since like 2000. It was my first show, and then I had oh I'm sorry, I do a Monday morning magazine with Julia Minton as well, once a month, and so yeah, I've been working for them a lot longer. I was doing a show on KHSU too, and then when that folded up, the Access Humboldt people approached me about doing a show.
Do you have a blog too? Or do you
I
do
do.
blog posts?
So
Okay, I feel
so
like
hum
I've read a few of
parlance.
those.
Yeah, I'm not as active on it as I used to be. I just don't have the kind of time to do it, and it's kind of becoming dated as a form, as a format. But there's still plenty of regulars who come and want to argue, and I just kind of let them argue, and the like. But yeah, so hum parlance, which so it started out as a blog about Southern Humboldt, but turned into anything all subjects blog. So
Yeah, people like to go in when they're in the comments and
yeah.
just say whatever's on their mind.
Yeah,
And you gotta just let them run loose.
I
That's
d
what the
I
comments are
mostly
for.
unless they're defaming somebody or, or bringing up things that are real private, I pretty much
Let them
let
go.
let them go. Yeah, just, it's and most of them are kinda respectful. There are a couple of idiots, but, just, do it. Sometimes I'll do it when somebody I'll interfere if, like, one person is just posting over and over and over again and dominating it, and nobody else is able to even participate because this guy's got his whole life is around it, and so I'll, like, say, "You know what? You cut down to some of those posts. First of all, you could do them in larger posts, instead of doing 2 sentences per post and crowding everybody else out. So I'll interfere like that just to keep it. Also, there's limits as to how far I'll let somebody take it off subject. I'm pretty
Try to
loose
rein
that
them
way.
in.
Yeah, just try to do that. It's of course, a blog can't be sued for defamation, but I still don't want that on my blog. I don't want it to become a 4chan kind of
Cesspool.
thing. Yeah, thing like that, and obviously proprietary stuff I could be nailed for. So I watch for that. But other than that, it's um, pretty much. I'm kind of a free speech guy who believes that, you actually have the right to. I disagree with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. I think you have a right to yell fire in a crowded theater. Um, you should have a right, and it's up to everybody else to like take a look around and not panic. But
So free speech absolutist, would you say?
I wouldn't say absolute, but I would say my threshold is pretty high in terms of what I allow. So.
So what do you make of our current climate with free speech? Because it doesn't seem like that point of view is in the majority, or at
Well,
least the vocal
well,
majority.
I mean, there's very little the government is doing that's to interfere with it so far.
Have you been following the Twitter files?
Yeah, but that's a private company. I don't agree
Yeah,
with
but the
all the
government
decisions.
interference does that make you uncomfortable?
No, I looked at it, and the only thing the only thing I saw was that the FBI had put out a warning that there might be some Russian misinformation campaign. Unfortunately, that appears to have been timed with the release of the information about Hunter Biden's laptop, and so it's been perceived as the FBI trying to suppress the story about the laptop. But the FBI was just had a general warning that, hey, watch out, this misinformation campaign, just like 2016, is coming. And nobody said, well, they didn't say, oh, well, look, watch out for the Hunter laptop story. So I don't see as that. And then the Biden campaign, apparently, what I've seen, the only complaint that they filed with Twitter wasn't the story about the laptop, but was about the dick pic of Hunter Biden. So I mean, I saw the Glenn Greenwald releases and stuff like that, and I'm a little uncomfortable about it, but I don't really see a interference there. I think Musk and Greenwald kind of went off half cocked on that. But
Really?
yeah,
That's your take.
that's my take. Because I'm reading the stuff and I'm just not seeing it. I'm not
What
seeing.
about Hamilton 68 or the blacklist that they were doing? None of that
I don't know what.
read you wrong?
I'm not sure what's Hamilton 68.
Hamilton 68, I've been going down a little bit of a black hole with this, is basically a dashboard that they were using in these they were using it to run all of these Russian bots are doing this, these
Hmm.
hashtags are promoted by the Russians, and it was all cited from this one site, Hamilton 68.
Right.
And Hamilton 68 said, "Oh, we have this proprietary list of all of these bots, and we can't release the list because then Russia would just delete the bots and start over with the new
Right.
campaign." And it turns out most of the people they were citing were just
We're actually
average
real people.
Americans, Canadians, British people, and they were news organizations were using this citing, "Oh, this is all the information,
And who put it
Russian
out?
bots." This
Who
was part of the Twitter Files release.
Okay,
I think it was
alright,
Twitter Files
right,
15, the 15th release they
yeah.
did.
But, I mean, I'd be concerned about that if they were, like, mislabeling people as
But they
bots.
did do that too.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
part of they
right.
had instances where, what is the parent company of the vaccine? BioNTech,
Mhm.
where they had people from there reach out to Twitter to get people
Right.
pulled for things as simple as saying, "Oh, we need a universal vaccine or a vaccine that's cheaper. Like, it shouldn't be patented. We
Yeah,
should."
that sounds like overkill. I mean,
Crazy,
yeah,
crazy, and
yeah,
just
yeah.
blacklists of I think that's the newest one that came out today.
So were they actually canceling accounts?
Yeah,
Okay,
there
yeah,
was
yeah.
an account this was part of the one I was trying to get into today, a list of 40,000 people that they had labeled as part of some radical party, I believe, in India, and it turns out it's just Americans, 40,000
Mm.
people, and they're like, "Oh, here you go, Twitter, ban these people."
And Twitter
And
just did
Twitter's
it?
like, "We know this is bullshit, but we're gonna do it." Yeah, because there's all these alphabet agencies that are coming to Twitter saying, "You need
Right.
to pull these people and just do that."
I mean, I don't I haven't followed on that. I've just been following the Greenwald, story in the Musk releases of the emails, and I just know that I was underwhelmed, as I was about a few other things along those similar lines. I mean, it reminded me a little bit of the DNC. I supported Bernie Sanders both times. I believe that Bernie Sanders was defeated because he did not unlock the key to the black vote, the Southern black vote in particular. He got crushed on Super Tuesday both times, and most of us who pay attention to politics saw it coming. Then what happened is emails were released, internal emails of the DNC. They hated his guts, but we all knew that. But then they said, well, maybe one of them said, well, maybe we should use his atheism against him and the rest. And like, yeah, okay, that looks pretty bad, except it never actually happened. Right. I mean, it was tough talk and they did that. And so I went through all of those emails and I said, okay, there's definitely a toxic culture that that they decide in DNC that they're going to back a candidate and they're communicating to each other about it and it was leaked, but was there actually anything done to undermine Bernie Sanders? I didn't see evidence of that in those emails. And the Greenwald thing was the same thing. I see these communications of the FBI saying, watch out for the Russian bot campaigns. And then the Hunter Biden thing comes there, and some Twitter executives decide to interpret that as, oh, that must be what it is. And that's seen as an act of government censorship. I need more information before I draw that conclusion, but because none of the emails said, "Oh, and by the way, there's going to be a story about the Hunter Biden laptop. Watch out for it because that's part of the Russian disinformation." That's not in any of the emails from the
I
FBI.
think the Greenwald must have been one of the first releases because a lot more has come out that shown direct that there have been monthly phone calls, very frequent sit downs
Well, they talk
between.
all the time.
No, but of them just bringing information to Twitter saying censor these accounts and Twitter
Okay,
doing
I
it.
have not seen that. I mean,
Yeah.
all I've seen is the Musk Greenwald releases.
Hamilton 68 is a prime example of that as well, of them just doing these just blanket censorship, blanket banning of accounts. Twitter, I believe with Hamilton 68 specifically knew that the accounts on that were just conservatives,
Yeah.
and that if they just started blanket banning, it would be every conservative on the platform because they all fell under that list. And these agencies were pushing that and they were just going along with it.
I'll have to look that up
You might be
when I go
surprised. There's
back.
some
So
crazy stuff in there.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm looking for it, and all of that, but again, Twitter is a private platform. If you don't like it, use another one. There's Mastodon. There's whatever the thing that Trump set up. I
True
forget what it's called.
Social.
True Social, right? I mean, you've got plenty of other alternatives. You don't like the way they do business, then don't do it. That's a difference there. So
I
it's
would buy that argument if it wasn't the government doing it. If it was just Twitter banning these people and it was arbitrary and they were doing it because they didn't like the opinions, maybe.
Well, Twitter didn't have to follow that information. I mean, it's not like the FBI can do anything to them. They're
But
not
they
breaking any
did.
laws.
That's the
Well,
scary part is they did.
that is, I mean,
And
I
not just the
I mean, Twitter
FBI,
just last
CIA,
week apparently
DHS.
barred somebody. I can't remember what it was for. A woman, a Republican woman who was sloppy with her wording, but she said, she was really upset that Biden allowed the balloon to fly across the country, and she said, "Shoot, lock, load, kill," or some stupid thing like that. But there was no mention of the balloon in the tweet. It was response to something Vice President Harris had said, and they blocked her or they canceled her account. That's concerning to me because look for the context and just request that she clarify what she meant. I'm sure she got a visit from Secret Service, and they would do all that. So that was Twitter under Musk making this decision. So um, that was jumping the gun, I think, because the more I look at it, like I said, my criticism of her is that's real sloppy wording when you're talking about the president and you've got things like shoot, kill in your tweet. You better damn well make sure you're communicating clearly. So, that was my concern there. Did Secret Service contact him, say shut down this account? I don't know. But this is Twitter under Musk. So why is it happening? So he's supposed to be the libertarian. Of course, he's banning. He's canceling all kinds of accounts right and left. People that are critical of him, people that are, you know, but that's his right. It's he owns it. So, I mean, spent what, $50 billion on it. He ought to be able to do what he wants. If you don't like it, go somewhere else.
It's again, it's just the government aspect that worries me. I think when the government starts playing with speech, and we know where that goes, and it doesn't lead to a good place.
Yeah, if they are using the coercive apparatus to do it.
Well, if somebody comes knocking from the CIA and they're like, "Hey, you need to ban these accounts. You need to do this."
I wouldn't pay attention to it. I would say, tell me why. Give me a good reason.
I think the problem is the people that were in positions of power at Twitter towed the party line because it was against people that they would generally disagree with. I think that's why it
I'm
gets
not sure.
dicey.
There are a bunch of them who claim to be libertarians, so I don't know. I'm not sure about that, as to what their political affiliations were. Maybe they got scared and did it, and if they did that, then I would be concerned about it. If they had reason to believe that there were going to be some type of government, um, coercive activity, I would say fine. If it's the government providing a list saying, "Hey, we think these are a bunch of, assholes, so you should cancel their account," I'm concerned about it, but less so. I mean, they're like a voice like anyone else, except that maybe you assume, "Oh God, they can't. Maybe they can't tell me the secret reasons why these people are there." So I'd be worried about that today. But I certainly wouldn't, ban anyone on my blog because some authorities contacted me. I'd say, "Tell me why." Give me the reason and maybe I'll agree with you, but you better tell me what the reason is. And that there was this liberal Democrat DNC cabal at Twitter. I'm not convinced of that. I think it's a bunch of people that were, clearly wanting to cover their asses, and probably just not make a mistake that could get them in trouble. I don't know, but it's he did fire a lot of people, but my understanding is he fired people who were Republicans too. So just because he wanted to have a complete change. Um,
Well, I think it was such a cluster you had to go in and clean house. It was
uh,
just a mess.
yeah, I don't know. It's up to him. It's his company. I don't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea. I don't know if it was that big of a mess. If again, it's a private platform. Like I said, I'm less concerned about a private platform than I am of active coercive censorship.
You should check back into the files. I think you might find something new this time that would
I'll
might
try, but
make
every
you
time I
reassess.
go, I get it's like, "Okay, give me something to be mad about." And I just haven't, every time they come out with this, it's like, okay, rather than throwing a bunch of emails out there, why don't you take a particular email and say, "This is the smoking gun. This is the one we're talking about." But it's sort of like, whenever somebody questions Greenwald on it, he says, "Well, it's the whole thing. It's not just you can't just point to any one email. Like, any one of them are fine, but all of them together mean this." And it's like, I'm reading, I'm like, I don't know if it means that.
I
So,
don't think that the Hunter Biden story is the most impactful aspect.
yeah.
I think it's a problem knowing that the FBI had the laptop for a year before it came out and they knew it was legit, and then they just so happened to go to these platforms and say, "Hey, if something comes out, might be Russian disinformation.
Maybe, but
Maybe. Who
but
knows?"
why weren't they specific then? Why didn't they say, "Hey, you got a big story coming that's going to be, busted." They took a chance on miscommunication there. I mean, the Hunter Biden laptop story,
What's your take
it's
on that?
well, first of all, I think if anybody has a gripe against Biden, Hunter Biden, it should be Burisma, the company, because I think he's a bullshit artist who basically goes in and sold influence he didn't have. What did they get? A 10-minute conversation on the tarmac of an airport somewhere. The and the interesting thing is they would say, well, Biden got the prosecutor who investigated him fired, but that prosecutor had actually closed the investigation. And part of the reason he was being fired was he was closing all kinds of investigations against companies, including Burisma. Burisma was being investigated for something that happened years before Biden was there. Was some possible bribe of somebody, and they concluded they didn't have evidence on it. So when Biden gets this guy fired, he's taking a chance that the next guy will come in and start reopening these files, including the Burisma file. And in fact, because of all of the controversy and the whole thing with Trump wanting, the dirt and everything being in the media, the next person actually did take another look at it and still concluded, no, there's nothing here, and certainly nothing that involves the Bidens. And so it's like, what exactly is it revealing? Well, that Hunter Biden is, an addict and kind of an asshole and ripped off Burisma for hundreds of $1,000s to get influence, to peddle influence that he didn't have. That's a controversy, but like I said, that's Biden's son, and everybody's got relatives like that, and he's we know he's had addiction issues, and we know that he's just does the stuff, but he was cashing in. My dad is vice president. Hey, yeah, hire me. And if anybody has the right to be, maybe sue for false advertising or something, it's probably that company.
Do you think there's any credence to the idea of selling access being a problem?
I think it is a problem if you've got it and you do it. Um, and especially if there's influence. If Hunter's saying, "Oh, Dad, can you push this influence? Can you get this prosecutor fired? Can you do that?" That's way out of line, of course, way over the top. Maybe Biden shouldn't have even done that 10-minute conversation at the tarmac. That we'll never know what that was about. But it's it certainly looks bad. And one of the things that you have to say about it that is fair game is you're supposed to, when you're in positions of power like that, is you not only you are supposed to not be to do the impropriety stuff, but you're supposed to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, and there's definitely an appearance of impropriety between that and the Chinese thing. Whether or not Biden is the big guy or whatever it is, as to what exactly was sold, again, it's sort of like, well, what did they get for it? I'm not sure. Well, we'll find out, right? Well, we haven't so far, and would that have had an impact on the election? I really doubt it, not without something a lot more specific. And by the way, the story did get out before the election. I was reading about it in mainstream NBC and the rest. It was not covering it maybe the way that some people wanted them to cover it. They wanted this to be the scandal of the century, and I think it was pretty weak tea. Like I said, Hunter Biden, the appearance is bad, and Biden, when he was vice president, should have said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to meet with your friends. Sorry," and maybe even have made a statement once the laptop story came out, and said, "No, I didn't." Clarify it, and even made the whole point that the media has been making, that the prosecutor that I got fired had already closed the thing. You got to look at the timing of all this, and he'd been covering up and probably was paid by Burisma to do that. Who knows? But then the next guy came in and looked at it and said, "I'm still not seeing anything."
Well, I think the story of the laptop was overshadowed by the story of the suppression
Right.
and the active hiding of it
Oh
and the
yeah.
lack
No.
of
Right.
desire to cover it or do anything with it and just brand it as misinformation and throw it
Yeah,
away.
but the Biden, and this is the misleading thing. There's claim out there in right wing media that Biden called up and told Twitter to suppress the story and filed a complaint. But the only thing that the Biden campaign called about was the naked picture of Hunter, saying this violates your standards, and they did it through the formal complaint system of flagging that particular thing. They did not say suppress the story, and they maybe even if I'm not saying they didn't want it suppressed. I'm saying they were definitely at least clever enough to avoid that. But what they definitely wanted off was the dick pic, because that could actually have an impact.
You
It's,
don't think it's almost too much of a coincidence that the FBI, which they knew that it was a legit story, they knew it wasn't Russian disinformation. They had it again for a year. They just happened to go right before it gets out that, oh, maybe something's going to come down the pipe and you should probably just disregard it because the Russians.
I'm not convinced that the FBI is somebody who's backs Biden or Clinton. because one of the reasons that going back to Comey, one of the reasons he released it a couple of weeks early is he was actually trying to do damage control because there were a bunch of right wingers out there saying we're going to leak this story if you don't make a statement about it, right? I mean, the FBI is not a left wing organization. People who are left wing don't grow up saying I want to be a FBI agent. It's just not in the character. Now, are they invested in powers, with the global elite or something like that? I mean, okay, possibly, but it looks like even that one FBI with the guy and his girlfriend or wife, I don't remember what they were, talking about how they wanted Trump to lose. They weren't even fans of Clinton. They just saw her as the lesser evil, right? It's and it looks like he did get in trouble, but even what they wanted to charge him with was a lot more than he actually did. So I'd have to be convinced that the FBI has been somehow taken over by this left wing cabal, and I just don't see how that happens.
I don't think it's a left wing cabal. I think it's, I mean, tying back into KPD, I think it's a willingness to play ball. And I think Biden is more willing to play the political game because he is a product of that system. And so if we keep Biden in and we can kind of get done what we need to get done.
I mean, did Trump frustrate any of their stuff? I need to see evidence of that. I
But
mean,
why come out and say that it's Russian disinformation when they know that it's not?
well, no, that's the thing. I don't think they were. We don't know if they were talking. There was definitely a Russian disinformation campaign. I don't think it was very effective
No,
this
but I
time
believe
around.
after it was released, they came out and
They
said,
should have come out and said no. I don't think the FBI ever tied the Hunter Biden laptop story to that. I could be wrong. I'll definitely check after we finished here. But my understanding is they never tied it to. Now maybe they ought to clarify and said no, that's not what we're talking about. But what they were talking about was a bot thing of memes going out. This is what happened in 2016. They
but that's a lie too. There was no, that's part of the Twitter files.
uh,
There's no evidence that Russian disinformation or
there's
Russian campaigns swayed the
I
2016
you're
election.
talking about the specific accounts, but the memes that got flooded all over, I saw them. They came
Yeah, but
across my thing.
there's no evidence that those were Russian bots, that those were just real people organically spreading stuff. Yeah, but
Spreading stuff,
organic.
right. I don't know. I mean, I thought that, like, multiple, intelligence organizations said that they originated that it originated with Russia.
That's part of the Twitter
Right.
files, is that
Right.
that's a lot of bullshit. That
Alright.
there was no mass Russian campaign with the use of bots to go spread this, that it's just organic stuff that they didn't like happening. I feel like I'm the conspiratorial
Yeah,
guy over here
yeah,
saying
I
this,
don't know.
but
I'm gonna
it's
have to take a
crazy.
look at that. I again, I mean, I saw the stuff coming across my feeds. I don't network
I
with
think there's a
these
lot more that's
people.
come out from the Greenwald. I believe they're up to
Mhm.
17 releases.
Yeah, and
Which
why
who
don't
has
they
time?
release
Yeah.
the best stuff first then? I mean, I lost interest after like the third release. I
But I
mean,
think
it's
that's
just
when I got in, was around 3 or 5, and I started saying,
I'll
"Okay, what is going on here?"
I'll take a look at it. Greenwald has gone off the deep end on a bunch of things, and so that's the other thing is probably shouldn't have chosen Greenwald to be the person, and let him write an article about it, not just do releases on Twitter. Let
You're not a
him.
fan of the Twitter thread idea?
I've never gotten into Twitter. I would prefer a comprehensive article with a beginning, a middle, and an end that tells us what you think is going on. Glenn Greenwald's analysis and citing the evidence of it. I'm not a fan of the Twitter format at all. I don't participate much in it except to see videos.
I
And
downloaded it just to go through the Twitter files. That's the only reason I got
interesting.
Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, it's so I guess I'll have to get caught up on it, but I just haven't I haven't seen anything that says that. I did see the media reports about how the Russian thing was oversold, but I haven't seen that it didn't exist. So, I don't know
By my
the details.
understanding, from what I've read, it seems like it was 100% bullshit, that
Well,
they just
the
oversold it to try
The
to
reason
sow some
I
fear.
question that is because there were you could actually see how much Russian information came onto your feed in Facebook.
But what makes it
You could
Russian
actually do it.
information? Was it in Russian? Was it
I think that they had traced things back to something coming through, something in the Middle East, and
But see, that's part of the problem is it's all this abstract stuff that is coming from the FBI or the CIA that we can't really fact check, and then it comes out from the
Except that when
Twitter
Facebook
files.
did provide an app that could tell you the origins of the memes that were coming across your feed, they did they and everybody was doing it. It did see now again, I don't know anything about the logarithms or anything as to how they calculated that, but Facebook itself had said, yeah, something really weird happened here that was beyond organic. So they weren't necessarily concluding it was a Russian campaign. They just said something really strange happened that cannot be described as organic. But I don't know. Maybe it was just that that there hadn't been an organic thing like that before that had happened. It was just, and I know that I also ran into Facebook that definite bots on the forums because anytime I tried to start a conversation with them, it didn't make sense.
Oh, well, there are definitely bots. I don't think
Yeah,
anybody's arguing the
yeah,
idea that those are out there. I think
right.
it's tied to when and where they've been used and for what purpose.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was specifically anytime I saw something that was questionable during the 2016 campaign because it was being reported that it was happening,
That's
and
the scary thing is that's
it,
all they have to do is just report
right,
it, and
right,
then
but
where are you what
then
sources are you
so
citing?
then when somebody would post one of these things on a Facebook forum, I would start questioning that person, and I couldn't get a conversation going. I mean, so it was that's anecdotal. That's just me and the rest. And sometimes there were questions about it, and sometimes they were incoherent. Just because I think they were incoherent doesn't necessarily mean they're a bot. It's just they just
Yeah,
aren't
not
articulate.
everybody's a genius
Right,
online,
yeah,
surprisingly.
or even, putting halfway thought into anything they're publishing. I mean, there's one guy I know who just basically has, things on a cut and paste that he just posts. It hits, but I know it's a real person just because of the dynamics of it. I don't think a bot is that complicated that it could respond and try to taunt me. I mean, if they've got a bot that can deliberately think they're being clever and trying to taunt me by repeating something over and over again. Well, that's pretty advanced, but in which case there's no hope. But I would test it out and could tell. So there were definitely bots that were posting stuff on Facebook forums. That I could find. How many of them? I don't know. It was anecdotal. It wasn't the majority of people who were posting, that's for sure. But I did encounter them, and since then, Facebook facilitators have upped their forum facilitators have upped their caution on it by asking for answers to questions that could point to whether or not it was even if it uh, responded in a certain way if seemed too mechanical and they could test it out. So I think that has improved since then. It because I'm a moderator in a couple of forums, and yeah, bots try to get in all the time. And so they answer the questions in a kind of a rote manner, and then I say, "Oh, can you elaborate on this?" And then I don't get a response. So it just like I said, how prevalent was it? Was it as big a deal as they say? Um, it definitely wasn't. I mean, and definitely they were saying, well, a lot of the pro Bernie stuff was part of the Russian bot campaign, but Bernie had young people that organized a very effective social media campaign. Clinton didn't have that. That was part of what gave him an edge for a while. So were they putting up bots? I don't know, but as long as it was, but were they Russian? If they were, I don't know. But it just, it, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to go take a look at the Hamilton.
Yeah, we'll have to
Yeah,
chat after you dive through
right.
that. I'd be interested to get your
Yeah,
take.
yeah. So, um, but again, this is just like I said, my anecdotal thing. There were definitely there, and definitely not. And there was an app where you could see how many of them came from possible what were suspect. But if it was simply the list that the FBI or some other or entity had provided, then obviously it doesn't mean much, does it? So, as opposed to having some real reason to believe that. that it was a Russian misinformation campaign. There were definitely memes where the English was questionable, but and I remember I thought, well, I would think that Russia would be a little more clever than that.
Yeah,
So
those are probably American.
yeah,
Those yeah, those are probably
yeah,
real.
yeah. So it's just right, or or from another, or somebody from another country, but not necessarily a government. So
Yeah.
yeah, uh,
It is a crazy time.
yeah, it is a
It is a
crazy time.
weird world that we are living in right now.
Right, and there is a question as to whether or not these platforms, because they have such monopolies, shouldn't be under some type of control. We have control over other medium, right?
Well, do you buy into the argument that they should be classified as public utilities, like a phone company, that we should get that protection from
I
them?
mean, if that's the case, I would like to see newspapers be fall under the same thing. With the radio, actually, the FCC, it's kind of a public utility. I think that's extreme, but I would say that maybe if there is such a monopoly, we have an idea of that this is where the discourse is. There is actually a body of law that says if you are have private property and you're treating it like a public kind of compound, that you have to allow a certain level of freedom of speech on that compound. Malls, particularly strip malls, have to allow people to be able to leaflet and the rest because it's quasi public, even though it's privately owned. So maybe there's something in that. But they don't want to go too far because they do want people to be able to control their private property to a certain degree. And so basically, as long as you're leafleting in a way that does not interfere with business, it's protected, even if you're on private property. So maybe there's something like that that could be exercised. But man, you're looking at a slippery slope there, because then who decides what is inappropriate if you're talking about content?
I think that's where we are now, is
Uh,
the willingness to just censor blatantly.
Right, but if you have a Congress pass a law that says the FCC or somebody can actually, go in and say you have to delete that, or you're going to, well, jail, or you'll be fined or whatever. That's different from just the putting out a list of things that's false or even right. Correct.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
opening it up as a public utility would eliminate that possibility, right? You can't just stop somebody from making phone calls to a number you don't like.
I don't know. Public utility is it's basically. I mean, we privatize it. We've got PG&E, which I think ought to be dissolved, but it's a private company, and but it is highly regulated. Um, and so if you're talking about regulating a platform for freedom of speech, and then Congress or somebody decides to take a particular step towards, well, we're going to make sure it's free, and therefore you need to do this. Well, then you've got the government exercising directly control over the format of it, and that could be problematic, because who decides what is appropriate and what is inappropriate speech? That's my whole problem with speech codes, for instance, is it's subjective. I mean, I I understand, for instance, the impulse behind having hate crimes, right? We can't, the government can't ban hate speech. It's protected outright. Campuses can, but that's a different framework. But the government can't do that. But what they can do is they can have a crime where if it's violent and it appears to be racially motivated, they can have a special penalty for it, aka hate crime. Um, but you're putting into the power into the hands of district attorneys and other government officials to determine what's a hate crime. And what a lot of people don't realize, and I'm not saying as to whether or not they're valid or invalid, but in Chicago, something like 2/3 of the hate crime um, prosecutions are of black people. So
Black people perpetrating the hate crime?
yes, yeah.
There's a shocker.
That's a shocker. So, is it because there is these deep prejudices in Chicago? Granted, it's a huge part of the population too. I don't know if it's 2/3, but it is disproportionate. Or is there bias in the prosecution of it, that maybe prosecutors are more likely, just like other crimes, to prosecute a black person for that than they are a white person? there's definitely the prejudice in every community. There's definitely anti-Semitism in the black community, anti-Asian sentiment in the black community, just as there's anti-black sentiment in the Asian community. I mean, it is that way around. But we need to take a look at it because when you have these laws, you're putting it into it. It ultimately comes to a decision by a human being,
Is
a
it
district attorney.
subjective? What classifies as a hate crime?
Well, it needs to be they need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the crime itself was motivated by hate of a particular group,
How
hatred
do you
of a
prove
particular
that though?
group.
How do you show that in
Well,
court?
sometimes it's obvious. I mean,
Well,
sometimes
yeah, if they
you
come
do
in
that,
maybe with
right?
a SWAT, like
Right,
a
but I
tattooed on the
actually
forehead.
defended somebody back. I don't do much criminal law anymore, but I actually defended somebody who was accused of a hate crime because he got into a fight with somebody who was Samoan, called him the N word, which was ignorant on several different levels. Um, Excuse me. And But I managed to get that part of it dismissed in the interim because because the fight started before that said it, and it was just of course your biases come out when you're under stress, and the N word just came out. It wasn't that he was motivated to start a fight because of that. He was motivated because of some other real stupid stuff. As usually happens in a bar fight. So you got to be careful about it because just because the N word is being used in the commission doesn't mean that the crime itself is motivated by that. And the theory between hate crime is that if you can create a special punishment for it, you can deter that particular crime. Possibly, I don't know that you can, but if they're really that uh, far gone that they're going to actually commit a crime based on motivation against that particular group, I'm not sure that you think in terms of, oh, I better not do that because if I get convicted of assault and battery, I'm going to be serving, 2.5 years rather than 1.5 year. People don't think like that, right? So I'm not quite sure if it's anything other than just making people feel good about, well, this person is more evil than somebody who just pounds on somebody for stupid reasons, like I want their wallet or
It's like you're tacking on an additional charge just for
right, but we
optics.
do that all the time with other types of things. It's enhanced if violence is enhanced if it's sexually motivated to do that. It's enhanced if you plan it ahead of time as opposed to the heat of the moment. It's enhanced if you use certain types of weapons. It's enhanced if
But
you
all those seem so much more definitive. You could tell if it's sexual nature, you could tell by the
Not
abuse.
necessarily. It you can have two people in a fight and there's contact made, that and then it gets charged that way because that's the assumption. And that has happened by the way. They make those type of things. It's not often, but you have to do it. But is it less definitive? I mean, certainly if you're, at a white supremacist meeting, you say we're going to go out and, kick some, blah blah blah. That's
A little
obvious,
more cut and dry.
right? If you are caught doing vandalism against a synagogue and you're putting stars of David on with a slash mark, yeah, that's definitive. It becomes less obvious, and every time there is a fight between somebody of different backgrounds, then it's suspected as the motive when, there's all kinds of motives for being an asshole, right? So it reminds me of you're too young to remember it, but when the series Roots came out, it was a big national cultural deal. Um, was bringing out discussions that really hadn't taken place before due to a national television thing. I think it was
It was
1976 or
about
something.
slavery, right?
It was Alex Haley's semi-auto or not autobiographical, but by history of his family, very much fictionalized. I mean, that's why it's called a novel, but based on his own family line. And it dealt with a lot of issues, and it just raised the whole discussion of slavery during that point in time. And there were a lot of other things going. It was like, not quite a decade after Martin Luther King had been killed, and a lot of other things happening, so there was a big discussion about it as to, how this was going to be inflammatory. And my mother, who was a teacher in a school in San Francisco had a kind of a conservative white principal, and the minute it came out, there were a lot of about 2 days after the first miniseries. It aired over the course of I think 2 weeks on whatever network it was on, and about 2 days after it started, a fight broke out between a white kid and a black kid, and without any facts, this principal in the teacher's room said, "It's that damn Roots, I tell you." And it's like, and the teacher's trying to tell him, we've got about, 100 white kids and about 150 black kids in here. They get into fights. Black kids get in a fight with black kids. White kids get in a fight with black kids, and sometimes black kids get into fights with each other. And up until now, you've probably dealt with how many of these fights, Don? And you didn't think it was due to some political thing, and then all of a sudden, Roots comes out, and 2 days later, and they were fighting over who got in was first in line to get checkout balls, right? For playing outside. It was a stupid fight that fourth grade kids get into. No evidence that either of them had even watched Roots, right? So you've got that assumption coming out, right? And so everybody makes an assumption that it's got to be based on this, and so that jump to that rush to a conclusion, I think, is something that a prosecutor, it's like, oh well, there's a bar fight between a dark skinned guy and a light skinned guy, it must be racially motivated. That shouldn't be the opening start of inquiry, because there are a lot of fights between people of different backgrounds.
But now it feels like that's almost the most important factor.
In the cases we hear about in the media, but actually, I don't think it's necessarily the case on the ground with all of the cases. I think that there are a lot of very responsible prosecutors out there who will look at it, and say, "Is there any evidence to that I should even look into this further?" And if the motive for the fight is pretty clear and it's not racial, fight over girlfriend or something like that, or just because they got drunk. Um, then they won't make that assumption. But there's pressure on them to do that, because if there's a high profile thing, something gets ends up on YouTube, a fight that was started by one or another, then there's a push to say, well, that was obviously a hate crime, and they've got to look at that real carefully. Because it's something that's in public, and my guess is that I don't know, I don't have any evidence to support it, but if you were to look at cases that were high profile because they got onto YouTube or some other medium, as opposed to cases that aren't on anybody's radar, more hate crimes are charged in that situation because they feel pressed to. But they got to be real careful, because it's pretty easy to raise a reasonable doubt if the only basis, as a defense attorney, you can get up in front of the jury and say they're making an assumption here, and there's no evidence to support it other than the fact that this person is white and this person has got this color of skin, and they don't want to have a jury ring their clock either, so they got to be careful.
I have seen a ridiculous amount of videos lately of black kids beating the shit out of
Yeah,
white people.
right.
There was that viral video of that black kid on a bus who maybe was a middle schooler just beating the shit out of this little girl who was
Yeah,
probably in elementary school, maybe?
right.
And then another one of this kid, I think he was in middle school, beating the shit out of his teacher who was white. And obviously it's blowing up because it's black versus white, and so
And
there's that
because it's on
element.
video, yeah.
But it's these kids beating the crap out of each other
We
and
do
out of
w w
teachers.
we do have to address some things in this country. There was a um,
You want some more?
no, I'm covered, thank you. I'm a lightweight, I don't do much drinking, so I better, stop there, but, the, um the, um I took a look at one time because it was reported that through, I forget what year it was. I think it was like 2018, maybe 2019. But there were documented, covered by media, attacks on Jews on the Eastern Seaboard, upper New Jersey to New York. I forget how many, about 30 of them. And I was kind of curious as to who was doing it, and I went through each one, and about four or five, I couldn't determine the racial background of the attacker, but of all of those, only one I found was white. They were either black or Arab. And this is an uncomfortable thing. Also, the attacks on Asians. We talk about how it is disproportionately the ones that are being reported are disproportionately black. Now, this is not to say, that anybody should conclude that black people are more racist than anybody else, but it is an issue that we need to deal with.
But there's a hesitation to even acknowledge that that's happening.
Everybody gets mad when I point it out. Why did you even do that? And it's like I was curious as to the backgrounds of people who were attacking them, and doing these attacks. And it's it, there's a lot to be said about, and there's a lot of explanations that point to things other than black people are more violently racist. Opportunity. A lot of the poorer white people who might be angry for whatever reason, they tend to live more in rural areas than urban areas, so they don't run into Jews or Asians as often. That doesn't mean they don't do it. And so if you were to do a proportional study, you'd probably find it wouldn't be all that much different. Right. And we do need to look. Nobody wants, and on the right or left wants to deal with this, is that poverty does enhance the impacts of bias, of racism or other prejudice. It just does. It's something we used to acknowledge, and they don't, and people don't want to do that. Say, well, what you're saying is poor people are more racist than white people, than rich people or middle class people. And say, no, that's not the case. The biases come out under stress. If your overall life is more stressed, and you're angry in general, it's going to happen, right? And if you've got opportunity, so much more. So if you've got, everybody blaming Asian people, particularly Chinese, um, for um, for the virus, and you personify it, that's why there was a rise, and continues to be a rise in violence against Asians right now. It's the thing to do, but we need to acknowledge that it's that it is disproportionately certain groups that are doing this. The other thing we talk about too is and this is, you'll find right wingers saying this all the time, and it's a true fact. The vast majority, not the vast majority, the majority of people, of men, actually hardly ever women, but of men who are killed by police officers are white.
You
And
can't say that.
what's that?
You can't say that.
But it's true numerically, but it's not true proportionally. The black people are 13% of the population, and about a third of the people who are shot and killed by are are black. White people are right around the same level as Latinos. And something very interesting that nobody wants to talk about either, and it might be a totally different kind of bias, but the one with the lowest rate, and I'm not talking number, and the lowest rate are Asians. And it has to do with, well, maybe police don't perceive them as a threat. Maybe there's our cultural aspects of Asians.
Economic status probably comes into play.
Well, no, they supposedly this is what studies exclude for
Oh, they
that
account for that,
most people who are shot and killed are lower class.
which is not a shock
No,
when you
it's
think
not.
about it.
It's not. Right. It's rare that a rich person gets shot. Whether you're black or white or the rest. It is. You can argue it's more of a class issue, and that's there. So if you're poor Asian, you're more likely to get shot than if you're middle class or rich Asian. Obviously, in fact, very few people who are middle class or rich end up getting shot. It's and that has to do, and there were probably a number of reasons for that, a number of reasons in terms of the attitudes of the police towards them, and a number of as to how they act towards the police, in terms of, we're those of us in the middle and upper classes are trained to be pleasant. We are socially trained for that. It's in a different way, and that's less threatening. And what we have to really acknowledge is, the is that just like we talk about how our gun deaths are higher than everybody else, way out of proportion, to any other country that's not in a civil war. um our police deaths are. I mean, Iceland, they had the first incident of a suspect being killed by police officers a couple of years ago, and it was the first time in about 100 years, and they treated it as a national tragedy. Doesn't even make news here, right? And it's just so is the problem police culture? Is the problem the violent culture overall? Is the problem a lot of other things that Iceland doesn't have? Um, it's not that Iceland doesn't have a diverse population. It's not all white, but it's also doesn't have the same level that we have. But none of the European countries, they all have multiple communities, and still they don't manage to kill their suspects.
Well, this is what upsets me about the conversation around race, especially,
Hmm.
is it's so disingenuous. You have people out here that genuinely believe that if I am a part of X minority group, I cannot be racist, regardless of what I say to
Yeah,
who,
well, that
but
has to do with
legitimately feel that.
that has to do with an academic perspective
Yeah, of the power dynamic that comes into
and
play.
also of that somebody somewhere decided that racism is backed what is backed by the institutions and the culture, whereas mere bigotry is what you feel individually. So they would say a black person can be bigoted towards a white person, but can't be racist towards a white person. I'm like, okay, it's fine. I don't care.
But it's factually not true. If we look at the definition of racism,
Well, they've redefined racism. Is what they did. They
well,
said
yeah,
it's
if we move the
systemic.
goalpost to fit whatever we
Right.
want it to
Now,
fit, what are we talking about?
I'm fine because, we've got 2 words. We've got racism and bigotry, right? So, so I'm fine if one of them gets dedicated to a particular concept, but you gotta have consensus on it. And
But
sort
how
of
do
like,
we have that
"Oh, yeah, who
consensus if we
decided it?
start yeah, if we
Is there
start
a committee out
moving
there?" Well,
definitions.
definitions change all the time anyway. I mean,
Yeah, but that something tells me that's not a unanimous decision to
it's
change
not a
that.
unanimous decision, and it's not something that's caught on much outside of academic left. It's that people are like saying, "Well, oh yeah, okay, that's what." But and the problem is when you're saying that, it's being interpreted as saying, "Well, people that a black person doesn't hate a white person as much as a white person hates a black person," and that's not what they're saying, but that's how it comes across. It's another bad term like defund the police. If you're going to say defund the police, and you don't really mean defund the police, and that right out the gate you've got to explain that defund doesn't really mean defund. Then you abandon the slogan because
But
it's
that's part
stupid.
of the problem is some people say defund the police and actually mean abolish the police, just
Yeah,
like
but
some people say you can't be racist
very
towards
few.
white
The
people.
people that came was it was basically what they should have said was reallocate resources towards other types of services that might help deal with these situations. And we got to, situations locally, for instance, where the police are arriving everywhere actually on a situation where they really need somebody trained in mental health awareness, right? But they're not trained in it. All when your only tool is a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. And sometimes they can be making a situation worse. And if their goal isn't to de-escalate, if that's not the number one, that should be the number one priority of any officer coming into a situation. De-escalate. Don't be part of the escalation. Don't be and so we don't so so if you say, well, we need to reallocate some of these funds to situations so that people can be called in who are mental health experts who might be able to de-escalate it if the police lack the tools to do that. Great. So don't say fucking defund. Say reallocate, or or pay more money towards these other aspects that are necessary for law enforcement. I mean, and so going back to that, going back to the question of racism, I mean, yeah, some academics somewhere decided that racism is different from bigotry. That it's something that it can't be systemic, but you got to have consensus on it, and not and if you're not taking a critical race theory class at a university, you're probably not. You didn't even get the memo.
Well,
So
I just feel
you know,
like all of that furthers the divide that we are experiencing in our country. It doesn't do
because
anything to
because
unite
because
us.
to call somebody a racist is has a negative impact,
Yeah,
whereas
but now that word almost has lost so much of its weight because everybody's racist nowadays. You're racist.
well, and the theory is that the theory is that we all are inherently to some degree. It's just varying degrees on a spectrum that we can't avoid it the way we're raised. Maybe even
But
some
you could argue some of that is just tribal genetics left over from when we were warring
it could
tribes.
be, and it could be also the way that we've been told to think about people, or we have one experience that shapes everything. You have five good experiences, then you have one bad experience, and the trauma of that experience makes you do it. So, see, my bias, and this is probably, maybe why I'm a left winger, is I was raised in a mostly white community, so all the bullies I had to deal with were white. So, so if anything, and actually I had to second guess myself on it because for a long time, I was kind of a rural community in the Bay Area, rural on the coast side there. A lot of the bullies I faced were into country music. I had a negative association with country music for the longest time. I, as an adult, had to study it and learn what it was about, learn that it's a variety of blues with a slightly different type of stuff, and I could come to an appreciation of it and the rest. But when I was in high school, I didn't want any part of it. I saw it as endemic to the culture of bullying that I was dealing with for most of my childhood. So I if there was a different social reality and white people were considered a marginalized class, I would probably be considered a self-hating, racist, anti-white person in that context because and there's a ring of truth to it because I was dismissing a whole genre of music based upon personal experiences with people who like that music. So we do have to watch it, and I bring that up as an example because there isn't my um, bias against these people isn't backed by institutions, or maybe it actually is because, as Martin Luther King pointed out, Appalachian whites faced a lot of the same prejudices. You had a Southern accent. You were looked down upon because of associations, and maybe there is, to a certain degree, a systemic. Um, I don't know what I don't racism or bias or class bias.
Well, poverty is the great equalizer, and that
Yeah.
seems to be what we've all forgotten is that if you're poor, it doesn't matter what skin color you are, you're poor.
Right. Yeah, and it's going to be different. I think Chris Rock made a joke, saying that well, here's an indication of racism. I'm a multimillionaire, and people and no white person would want to be in my shoes. And I'm like, I don't know. I might take that money and take deal with a bias. I'll move to Europe if I have to, right, or somewhere else. But it's and I even I got into a lot of trouble in college for joking about white privilege because and I was very skeptical of the concept, and I still am actually in some ways, although I do think there is white privilege, but I think of it a lot differently than a lot of my fellow leftists do. But I remember saying to a professor who was really patient with me, African American woman, Carolyn Clark, great person, who I said I kind of joked and said, "Well, does anybody know where I can like trade my privilege in for a bike? I'll take a bicycle and the rest like that." And she was very patient and said you would have seller's remorse within a week, and and maybe true, but that was the thing. I was sort of like, well, okay, I can give it to you. I'd give it to you, right? But maybe there are aspects that if I actually experienced them would say, holy shit, what have I gotten myself into, right? If I
But that's such a
Mm,
nuanced argument, and everyone likes to
yeah,
point to white privilege, but there are a ton of privileges out there. Having a family that is strong and united and
is it,
isn't abusive and that
right.
cares about you and is supportive, that's probably the greatest privilege there is.
It does, and it does have an impact on your success on all aspects of life. Definitely, that's a privilege.
What makes me uncomfortable about the race argument, or especially uncomfortable, is people's willingness to dismiss certain cases because they don't want to diminish whatever narrative they're trying to push. I heard that a lot when I believe there were those 2 cases where Chinese people they committed mass shootings,
Hmm.
and a lot of what I heard was, "Well, we shouldn't talk about that, we shouldn't promote that because it's gonna
Right.
take away from the racism that Chinese people are experiencing, and that's not good. So let's just sweep that under the rug
Yeah.
because it
Oh,
doesn't matter."
we have to embrace complexity. There
But
are
that means
complex things
complexity across the
all across
board.
the board. We have to embrace that that there aren't simple solutions and there aren't simple ways of looking at the problem. There probably is a implicit biases that we encounter because of our experiences and because the way we're raised and because of things that are reinforced and discouraged in the way we're brought up. And I definitely think I've got a bias against redneck white people. I work to deal with it. I actually have to second guess myself every time. You know, when I was doing um, the tabling for Measure K, the sanctuary ordinance a few years ago, I had this guy walking up that just looked to me like he would be a typical MAGA person, right? He was walking up and he was kind of grimacing and had this real strange look on it. And what I wasn't paying attention to is he was kind of limping. And he came and he was, and I thought I was going to get yelled at because I'd had some experiences yelling at, and it turned out this guy was completely supportive. Um, and the looks on his face came from pain because he was in had a medical condition that was, but here I made this complete judgment about him. The same day, a guy walked up in dreads with Bob Marley, not Bob Marley, God, the uh, what's his name, Toots and the Maytals guy, but he had a T-shirt of that, and I thought he was going to support me. First thing he said was, "My parents came here the right way. They immigrated the right way. You're supporting people who are coming here the wrong way." I'm like, "Really?" I'm just, so it was just, so I made assumptions on both
But
ways.
see, I think it gets dangerous confusing that with bigotry or racism because that is just inherent in everybody. You're gonna see somebody, especially if you don't know them for the first
Hmm.
time, and your brain is going to make a rapid judgment. You could
Yeah.
argue it's for safety, part of the fight or flight response. It's all of these nuanced conversations,
Right.
but you're gonna do that. It doesn't mean you're a racist or you're a piece of shit or if I see
Uh,
somebody coming up regardless of how they look, skin color wise, and they're frowning or look like they're angry, I'm probably gonna be a little more aware of, okay, where is this gonna
yeah.
go? As opposed
Right.
to if they walk up with a smile.
Yeah,
Does that mean I'm racist against
would I have had the same reaction to a Latino guy walking up to me? I don't know. I can't say that. I could say he looked to me conservative. He looked like somebody who would be conservative. And I don't even remember the details, but that was my impression when he was coming. I'd already faced him, even though I was outside the co-op. There are a lot of conservative people who shop at the co-op, and I just completely misinterpreted. He was like, a complete supporter. And
but that's part of the beauty is sometimes people
Yeah,
will surprise you.
exactly, exactly. But the point is I had that bias, and I wonder if I had a different background being raised dealing with people who I've labeled rednecks, if I wouldn't have had that same reaction. I don't know. I just, what I'm saying is I think I've got an implicit bias against white rednecks because of my experiences. I was rarely bullied by anybody who wasn't white. I think I can think of one incident when I was in the first grade in the city. Other than that, never. So we are the product to some degree of our
But again, is that an
experiences.
implicit bias or was that a trained response?
I don't know.
Right? I mean,
I
if
don't know.
everybody
I
if
don't know.
I see somebody that has a purple hat on and
Hmm.
every time I see that, I get slapped,
Right.
I'm not gonna go out looking for purple hats. I'm gonna
Yeah.
steer clear. I mean,
But
where
it
does the
was
training come in?
reinforced by my parents, my dad, saying, we got to get these kids out of this place. We got to move them back closer to the city. So I had reinforcement of it, of that. I didn't tell them about as much of the bullying because you can't get grown-ups involved. I had to deal with it myself. But so I don't know how much of it was reinforced. My parents were left-wing political people living in a kind of a conservative working class, mostly white area. I don't know to what degree that reinforced the conclusions I drew from the experiences. Like I said, I don't know. I'm just saying that is, one potential for bias that I was conditioned for, and I'm aware of it, and I'm trying to deal with it. But it's not one that really gets acknowledged by the left. People who might have had similar experiences as I did, being one of the few hippie kids in a redneck community, right? It's just I wasn't even hippie. I didn't look like a hippie, but I acted like one. I talked like one. So it was just it, the answer is I don't know. I'm just saying that, throwing out there is I can go by my personal experiences and think, had I been raised in the city like Metzger, who is the son of Tom Metzger, who started the White Aryan Resistance and the rest. He claims he was raised in the city in Los Angeles in public schools, and that's what made him the way he was. I don't know. It just it's would it have been different if I'd experienced those? Would I have more implicit fear of it? I just didn't have that kind of experience. The people of color I met that were living on the coast side were tend to be middle class, even richer than most of the white people there. So I didn't have that negative experience with them. I wasn't, you know, um,
My biggest fear is that we're just making race harder today. The path that we are walking is just reinforcing divides that we sought out to get rid of.
yeah, and
That's
what
my biggest fear.
right. I don't know the answer to that either. You know, every year we have this holiday, Martin Luther King holiday. Um, and there's rituals. Everybody has their rituals. You see, I Have a Dream being played all over the airwaves, maybe some portions of the I've Been to the Mountaintop speech because he was killed the next day. So that was kind of iconic. And you always have the left wing stations coming out about the buried or the covered up or whitewashed Martin Luther King, that he was a radical. He had, when he was killed, he was working on labor union issues. He took a stand against the Vietnam War. He took stands against capitalism. Basically, maybe he was borderline socialist. He had a lot of friends who were. They talk about covering that up and whitewashing that, but one of the things they don't like to deal with is the fact that Martin Luther King was a radical. He was left wing radical in these ways, but he also advocated policies of color blindness. Now, would he have 10 years later, 20 years later? I don't know, after, a lot of the racial theories had advanced and stuff. But I do know that Malcolm X and other people and other black activist radicals of the time saw him as a sellout, saw him as House N word is what Malcolm X referred to him at one point, and the rest. And so, yeah, he's being whitewashed, but let's embrace the full complexity of this. He um, he his view of race and racism was a bit different from the prevailing trends in anti-racist thinking today.
But that sentiment right there is
Yeah,
what's insanely
right.
crazy
So
is
what?
just
Yeah.
the idea of he's whitewashed because he's trying to
Well,
unify across
that,
race.
no, whitewash being that they bury his actual political
Or not
stances. Yeah,
whitewashed, but a house N-word.
that's right. But that was Malcolm X, and Malcolm X did change his attitude about
But
that later.
people feel that way today if you
Yeah,
date across
right.
race. That no, you gotta date within your own race, which would be crazy to
I
say.
haven't I haven't seen a whole lot of that.
I've had people well, I've heard it from the black community,
Yeah.
and I've had people on here say that, no, if you're black, you should date a black person. That I
I
would
have
think
I
of
have seen people say that because
that's
they
so
say
crazy.
genocide and the
Love who
rest,
you love. What happened to that?
but it's pretty rare on the dating apps. Um,
I've heard it a lot.
the dating apps, you do have people who will select preferences for races, and some will select preferences for other races, but the vast majority of people in the dating apps, because
Are
they
you
have the
spending a lot
data
of
there.
time on the dating apps?
No, it was a study. I wish I was, but uh, the but I'm a little anyway. But the no, it's no. In terms, there was a study where they took, because you got hard data there. You've got people who say what they prefer, and there might be people who might fudge what they actually prefer and just look for particular things. But they talked about the rates of interest between groups, but they cautioned, and you draw any conclusions for it. For instance, the lowest interest was black women to white men, and there's a lot of possible reasons for that. And the biggest interest was all of the groups preferred white women. A lot of stuff there, but the differences weren't that large. And what the people of the study said, first of all, we really want to clarify something here, because the vast majority of preferences stated was no preference. So something like 60 to 70 or 80%, I don't remember what it was, of people who are asked to cite a preference for harmony or whatever like that say, no, I don't care. Do they mean it? I don't know, but that's what they state. So when you're talking about the groups that prefer one race over another, whether it's another race or your own race, it's a small group. So it just and then, and then there are people, and some of them would say, sometimes it's not just a question of, who you're attracted to, but you want somebody from your community that's got similar values and similar experiences. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not physically attracted to the person or otherwise attracted, in different ways. There are people who, say, I just want to, I don't want to have struggles in my personal relationship. I've had them before and I don't want to go through that again. It's just too hard, from one perspective or another. So maybe it's better if I get somebody who thinks a lot like me and has similar social background, similar socioeconomic class, similar education level, and similar ethnic background. So is it a bias or not? We don't have any way of knowing. But the point is that even that group where you have to try to sort all that out is a minority. Now, there's all kinds of things you have to look into because people who use dating apps probably are more educated than other people, right? It's and
Is that the assumption?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying, they've got computer access, and we know there's an internet access divide in this country. So we know there's a whole class of people who that's just not a viable option. So that excludes one class of people there, unless they go to the library and do it. I don't know. Like I said, but the point is that we've, it's hard to say what the study means, in terms of things, and in terms of why people are um are taking those positions. But the most important thing is that the majority of people didn't have
Don't
it,
feel that way.
don't have, or at least they don't say they do.
I
um
don't have a problem with people having preferences. I think
yeah,
that's just human nature. I think the
right.
blanket idea that you should not date X person because of their skin color, I think that's a problem.
Well, there are people who are worried that, they're going to be bred out of existence, but that's probably going to happen anyways.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be that there aren't going to be any very many very light or very dark people a couple hundred years from now, if there's still people. It's just, because people are traveling and migrating and mixing it. It's probably not, going to, be that way. So, but I think there are people who are saying, I got nothing against those people, but I want to maintain the integrity of our,
Yeah, but
fair.
imagine a white person saying, I want to maintain the whiteness of my
I
race.
hear
How
you. I
problematic
hear
that
you.
is.
Exactly. That would
But
be
then if
problematic.
if a black person or a Latino says that,
I guess the argument would be
I'm just
that
trying to
there's
save my
no
culture.
danger of white people being extinct anytime soon, but 13% of the population being black, maybe
Yeah,
there's
but globally, aren't white people in the minority?
oh, way in the minority. Yeah, it's definitely the case, but within the context of the United States, we've got
See,
these
that's another part
things.
of the problem is people like to pick and choose the information that suits whatever narrative they're writing.
Well, and there are people who have very specific identities. They say, "I'm not just black; I'm African American." That's a very specific context, and it comes with a very specific set of values and ideas and experiences. And some people might think, we're losing that. But, there's ways, there's plenty of other people say, "Well, we don't have to lose it. It changes." Everybody, I mean, you've got people, for instance, in the culinary area saying, "We're losing with all this fusion, we're losing the true Cantonese, Chinese, the true French, the true Italian." But then again, all of those are so diverse within themselves and constantly changing. Is the Italian food of today definitely isn't what it was 500 years ago. They didn't have tomatoes, right? I mean, it just,
The Italian food in America isn't what it is in
and
Italy.
it's not what it is in it, right? That's why Italians would say you need to stay pure. But it's not like we're going to lose the recipes. I mean, it's just, and so that's the same kind of a thing. You have these ideas, and they're going to change because even if you try to stay pure, it's going to evolve. Any
Well,
culture is
life
going to evolve.
changes.
Exactly.
The world
So
is constantly moving.
right. It is. Language changes, and that's why I wanted to get back to the point about definitions. Things get redefined all the time. Um, Not always with political agendas, but
That's that's the key. there is not with political agendas, and it feels like today that's the only reason we're changing definitions is to fit political agendas.
I don't know about that. The definitions change just in terms of, and our language changes all
Well,
the
yeah,
time.
but I mean, they
But
changed the definition of a recession because of our current climate. They changed the definition of
recession has
racism.
never been that clearly defined. One group of economists defined it as two consecutive quarters of non-growth, but that's always been a dispute. Different economists have have had that. So it's not that it's changed. It's just that we are learning more about the 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 differences of theories in economics. But I hear what you're saying. I mean, it's yeah, you definitely want to change things, and we definitely use language. I mean, in war, we use language to change things. We don't talk about, oh, we killed our buddies. We talk about collateral damage, right? We don't. I mean, we've
Yeah,
always
that's a scary idea,
yeah,
collateral damage.
collateral damage. I
How many
mean,
civilians does that mean?
Exactly. I mean, it's we have we have somebody who is, well, we've got two opposite sides. We've got people who are pro-choice and people who are pro-life. But who would say I'm anti-life and I'm anti-choice? Nobody says that, right?
There might be a few of them out there.
Maybe, maybe a few of them, but not many. And so, it's because you frame it. Both sides have framed it in a way that what they want people to think about the issue. It's and plenty of examples like that. That's not a changing definition, but I'm just talking about use of language and how things are. I mean, I'll tell you one political effort that has not caught on at all in the community is Latinx.
That's because that's so stupid.
Right.
That is so I mean, you
Yeah.
wanna talk about preserving your culture, this is
They're bringing
literally
X
trying
into a
to alter
into
it.
the thing. Yeah, it's there now. Culture is going to be altered. You want culture to be altered in a
Yeah,
way
but
that
this isn't
makes
even from the people in the culture.
it
I've
did.
only ever heard it from
It did.
white
It
people
actually did
saying,
originate from Latino, a trans Latino grouping in about 2007 or 2008. But the ones who embraced it later were more political people of different backgrounds and that stuff. But it hasn't caught on. I think fewer than 7% of self-identified Latinos or Hispanics embrace
"That
that
is
term.
so dumb."
Yeah, it's a wrong use of the word X. You can argue it's colonial,
Well,
right?
and a complete abject failure of the understanding of the
Yeah.
language.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, and then there's the political language specifically changes, and you've got to be very careful about it. For instance, we have this term now that is broader that describes racist culture. We say it's colonialist, right? Well, colonialism used to have a very specific meaning. It was a relationship between two countries, right? It was or a country and its territory. It was one country exerting political control over its territory, and then later on, we had the left economists and sociologists came up with the term neocolonialism, which was one where a country like the United States or Soviet Union doesn't exert direct political control over the machinations of a government of another country, but they've got so much economic control that they determine what's going to happen there, and with the threat of invasion, blah blah blah. They called that neocolonialism. So then fast forward 30 years later, and I didn't even know that the term colonial had come to this broader modern term. And the rest, I use the term neocolonialism, and people are like saying, "Oh, that's wimpy. Just say colonialism." I'm like, "Well, no, it's not. There's a difference between neocolonialism and colonialism. Colonialism is a very specific type of relationship. Neocolonialism is de facto colonialism, or something like that." And they just absolutely flipped out because they said I was undermining the concept of using colonial, to say you're a colonist or a colonialist, not a colonist, colonialist, and the rest, and that language, they didn't say it outright, but they're like saying, implying, I want you to stop using the term neocolonialism. I'm like, I don't have another word for it. Right, I think it was actually one of the more useful terms that the left has come up with because it does describe a concept that is that is very real. That when you have colonial relationships, and then a country is given its independence, how independent it is it if it's economically dependent and possibly subject to invasion? Even maybe even. I mean, there's definite ways there. So give me another term. And they just say imperialism. No, that's not the same thing. That's different. They're related, and besides which, imperialism is such a charged word. In the 60s, they talk about, we got to talk about imperialism without saying the word imperialism, because if you say that, they're just going to think you're a Marxist and write you off, right? So I don't want to use that term because first of all, it's vague. And imperialism itself, it implies empire, and empire has its certain categories. So this is an interesting debate, but I still see neocolonialism used, but only in describing very specific things. But it's odd because here we have colonialism. They'll say, "Oh, he's a colonialist, and so there must be colonialism." Then what's neocolonialism? It came before colonialism, apparently. The new use of the word colonialism. I mean, it's a fascinating thing, but the language gets so emotional. I actually got myself kicked off of a forum one time, a Facebook forum, because we're talking about pronouns, and the rest.
Dangerous territory nowadays.
Very dangerous territory. I mean, and there are a lot of stupid people out there on the right that don't understand that a pronoun actually is a term that they ought to learn about in the third grade, because they're saying, I don't want any pronouns. There are no pronouns in the Constitution, right? And it's like, dude, the first word is like a pronoun, but it's just the use of they and them. And I just happened to bring up in a forum one time, Marge Piercy, in a novel called The Woman on the Edge of Time, envisioned a utopian future where people use the word per for person, as a, if you didn't want to be specific about the gender of the person you were talking about. And I just said, doesn't that make a little more sense? I made the mistake of saying it makes more sense than referring to they, which is plural, as as a pronoun. And I don't care. I'll say they. I don't mind. They're right. We say it accidentally all the time anyway. We say they, when we mean somebody singular. Jane Austen did it, and the editor didn't catch it. They use that as evidence to show that it was in the language. So some editor's sloppy editor is now responsible for that. But all I said was, well, this is just it makes a little bit more sense. And they thought I was arguing that they shouldn't say they, that they should say per. And I'm just like, no, it was an intellectual but I didn't apologize in the right way, because I just don't have fucks to give about that anymore. I'm just like, you know what, kick me out, and they did. So it just was, and you had one person who claimed to be trans saying, "You're making me feel unsafe." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm 3,000 miles away from you. How are you unsafe?" But it's
That is such a loaded phrase that is just blanketly used to shut down
it
conversation. I
is.
feel unsafe
And
with
that's
this topic.
and that will have the effect, because if you say that to me, okay, I don't want to make you feel unsafe. I'm going to shut up.
Well,
What
and
have you
that's by your
accomplished?
choice, but in most
Right.
cases, you'll
What have
get
they
banned.
accomplished? They've shut down the discussion. Okay, but they haven't resolved the
But
issue.
that's their goal. Their goal isn't
Whatever.
to resolve anything, it's to just shut down the conversation.
Whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to it's not like arguing that person is going to accomplish anything anyway. And most people don't say that. Most trans people would say that's stupid. You're not being unsafe. You're missing some of the points, maybe they would say, and we'd have the argument then, right? But it's just but most people wouldn't say that. That is something that some people resort to. I think most people don't. And but when we see it happen, it all of a sudden becomes elevated to something everybody does. And then the people who do say it get on the defensive and say, well, I said it because I really did feel unsafe because the guy was in my face, right? It's like, oh, and so it's like, so can I never say it? So it's a real tough discussion. And we just, how we de-escalate the conversation to the point where we can have intelligent discussions, and we can. It's not like they can't happen and that they don't happen. We do
Well,
have
there's definitely it almost feels like there's a two-pronged attack on
yeah.
speech. You have the one hand where we're trying to erode these understood definitions of what we're saying, and
Mhm.
then you have censorship and this compelled speech,
You
and if
know,
you have to fit into that narrow box,
I
otherwise you don't get to participate.
yeah, but like I said, it's very rare that that's actually happened to me. It happens, and I think part of the problem is you've got the internet where discussion just isn't really it's really easy to offend and really hard to heal a
And not
discussion.
encouraged.
Right.
Authentically, it's not
No,
encouraged.
there is, in fact, there's an actual Daily Show had a piece that they're going through using different hosts. Chelsea Handler was on there saying that there's actually articles about how social media are making money off of your anger by making you angry.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
Yeah, it's and how they promote it actually to a certain degree because it leads to more hits and leads to more stuff like that. And so part of it is that it's disembodied. I have a feeling that if I was sitting there having a conversation with the person in the coffee house or something, that they wouldn't say I was unsafe. But it's something that you say that gets you to win the argument. And has anybody ever really feel like they've accomplished something after arguing on the internet? I mean, it's very rare. I have actually had it where we actually reached an understandings after having some heated discussions, but it's rare.
I don't engage in the arguments in the
Yeah,
comment
yeah.
section. Sometimes I'll dive in just to see what's going on. I'll throw out a couple comments, but I try not to.
I have to admit, I'm guilty, and I've even baited sometime, and it's so easy, and I need to not do that. I've been trying to say no, don't do it, bad Eric. So don't bait because you're not accomplishing anything, and so it's like, but sometimes it's so tempting.
There's a thrill to it. I
Well,
mean, even just reading some of the back and
and
forth.
not only that, when somebody's being what you view as really stupid and deliberately stupid, like you don't think they're actually that stupid, but they're acting stupid because they're rewarded by being stupid, it's really hard to not do it. But I've been trying to do it and say, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so I don't. I almost had it as a badge of honor that I was getting kicked out of right and left wing forums, and I'm like, okay, what am I doing?
That's my problem. I get banned on TikTok for being too far right, and then I
Mm,
get banned everywhere else for being too far left. It is a weird
yeah,
juxtaposition there.
yeah. It is strange. And it's easy to offend, and it's sort of like, and you say, so what? Okay, I got kicked out of a forum. That's not a big deal. It's different from being kicked off of a whole medium, or different from having obviously from having people show up at my house and arrest me because I said something wrong. Which we're not there yet, but it's just
But we're definitely taking steps to get there.
maybe. But I've been hearing this for 50 years of my life. I don't think we're really I don't know that it's going to happen. I think people put up arguments and stuff like that. We have our social sanction way of censoring, and as opposed to using the state to actually go and arrest or
Social
shut down.
sanctioned. Oh, okay. As opposed to
Your
being
social
arrested.
sanctions in that, well, you're not going to get to be part of our group anymore if you do this. You're going to be shunned. You're going to be shamed and all of that, and part of one of the advantages of being, a kid that was bullied by the whole class because I was one of the smaller kids is I really don't give a fuck. You can try to shame me all you want. I don't care. If you want a reason, that's fine. But if you want to do, a gang up where you've got one person after another, calling me an asshole one form or another, I don't care.
People don't have that thick skin today. That is like a lost protection in society.
It just, yeah, and because words are violence, and it's like, no, words aren't violence. Violence is violence. Words are not violence. Words could lead to violence. I mean, we do have, there is in some states a fighting words defense to that if you said the wrong kind of a thing and you end up punching somebody, you could actually be acquitted of a crime because they said fighting words. We don't have that in California. Most states do not have that, and the rest. But it's okay. So that just means that the biggest guy gets to be the most insulting, right? I mean, it's just it is it is. But I really do think take and of course I'm not somebody who has is in a different group of people who maybe have experienced things all the time, but I do take a sticks and stones approach personally. I don't really if you're somebody who's going to write me off, I don't care. If you're somebody who is like, well, Eric, I really I really care for you, and I'm concerned that you think this way, and I want to talk about it. Great, I'll talk to you about it, and you might even change my mind. I mean, it just there are things, and people say, well, what about the people who truly believe that they is inappropriate, that there should only be he and she, and you're forcing them to go against their belief system to do this? Well, I personally believe in my political beliefs that women who choose to be called Miss or Mrs. are caving in to a patriarchal pressure to that they are that that they are defining themselves by their marriage to women. Men don't have to change their name. Women do, and by embracing that, you're kind of undermining that kind of a thing. But if you want to be called Mrs. or Miss, I will do it anyway, despite my beliefs about it, because I respect your autonomy to be called who you want. And so I wish that more people who are arguing against the trans thing would simply do that. Say, you know what? I don't think that it's appropriate that we are using they or whatever, but I will respect you and refer to you the way you want to be referred. I don't, uh,
People are so soft today. That's the problem, is that
yeah,
these words are literally as detrimental to their health as being punched in the face in their view.
in their
That
view
there it doesn't make a difference.
until they get punched in the face. As somebody who's
And then
experienced
they
both,
then
right?
it's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I had psychological bullying too when I was a kid. I faced a lot of bullying as a kid, and the rest. And when I started to grow out a little bit, even though I was still short, I got pretty strong. I faced less physical bullying, but I still wasn't part of the in crowd, and I got a lot of it. I think I just was inoculated to it. I
Did
didn't
you
care.
hear that story about that girl? I think she was 11 and she was bullied and they beat the shit out of her in school and filmed it and then posted it online. She killed herself.
No, but I believe it happens, and I don't want to underscore the effect of bullying. It was horrible. As a kid, I really wished it didn't wasn't happening when it was happening. Um, but
It's a nuanced conversation though, because you
yeah,
have your thick skin because of it. And most people that
right,
have thick skin, unfortunately, it's because they went through some hardship as a child. And the
right.
kids or the young adults today that are soft, it's because they've managed to just skirt through up to this point by just shutting down anything that offends them.
Unless they also have post traumatic stress or something like that. Things. I don't want to sell that short. It just there were, but I had in order to just emotionally survive, I had to develop a thick skin. That's true. I mean, it was just that way, and it was every fucking day at one point. Where I was like just getting off the school bus and getting home without getting into a fight was like a major ordeal. It was just, and I lost most of the fights. I was small until eighth grade, and then all of a sudden I filled out, and then they didn't
Is that
mess
when
with me
things
anymore.
started to change? Yeah.
Yeah, it was. But there are different kinds of bullying. There's social bullying because I wasn't in part of a group, and a lot of people who wanted to be more socially engaged, where I was alone and I didn't give a fuck, right? I liked my solitude, so it was just I had a few friends that I knew that they were real friends, and I hung out with them, and I was happy with that, right? I didn't care what the rest of the class thought of me. I did in fourth or fifth grade just because it was hard to get through the day without doing that, and I did try to fit in, but I couldn't fit in. I just was not culturally could not culturally relate to the people, and they couldn't relate to me. It just was that different. We were the same skin color, but we came from very different cultures, different upbringings that were happening right then and there. And so it just was but yeah, and people would say, I've heard people get on TV and say, "Yeah, we should allow the bullying because it'll develop stronger stuff." And it's like, well, yeah, but people can develop their thick skin and their character from it. It's like, well, why aren't you worried about the bully's character?
Well, that
They're
bullying
not.
also leads to people killing themselves.
Well,
It's not as
right. Yeah,
cut and dry as you making
no,
it out alive.
I agree, and not only that, it's like what my response if I'd been able to stick my head into the TV and talk to the people that were doing that was, you know what? just keep your psycho kids away from mine. I'll worry about my kid's character. You don't have to worry about that, right? It's just it is
It's a challenge because
it's a
everybody wants
challenge.
their kid to grow up to have thick skin and be
Yeah,
able to be comfortable in who they are, but
right.
nobody wants their kid to go through the challenges that normally lead to
I
that.
would not want any kid to go through what I went through. It was really hard. It was, my parents eventually did move us out when they came into some money. It was, and then all of a sudden I was in a rich kid school and I wasn't as rich, and that was a little different. That was a different experience, but it was, but everybody was nice and everything like that. But I just knew and felt different, right? You don't, there doesn't have to be bullying for you to feel separated.
Well, and how much of the bullying is just tied to shitty parents?
Oh, absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
the part nobody
I
wants to
came
talk
to
about.
feel about that, and this is actually kind of a funny anecdote, because I actually, as a lawyer, had somebody walk into my office who bullied me when I was in the 7th grade. Didn't remember that he did,
How the
and
tables turn.
well, it was, and I didn't bring it up. I was like, I'm sitting there listening to their real estate problem and coming up with how I'm going to solve it. But part of me is going through the head, I could totally take this guy, right? It was like, and I'm like, come on, stop, grow up. You're 50 years old, dude. But it was hard for me to shake. And then at the end, I said, we actually knew each other, and he had the saddest look on his face and said, "Oh, I hope I wasn't too much of an asshole." And I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We were kids."
But
But
again, that speaks to your character, and arguably because of the ordeal that you went through, because some people in
right.
that position would have dunked on him in that moment or kicked him
Yeah.
out or said some
No, no,
shit.
no, not for a 7th grade incident. I would hope, but I don't know. Maybe people do hold the grudges, and I know that he actually had it rough. He was dealing with stuff at home that I didn't have to even imagine dealing.
Well, that's how it plays out most of the time,
Yeah.
is shitty parenting or shitty home lives, and then they get to school and they just pick on whoever's below
Whoever's
them.
there, and it just was, yeah, it was hard. Of course, the kid took a slingshot away from me, stole my slingshot, and so of course my bookkeeper was saying, well, why don't we put the slingshot on with interest coming from 1970? Like, we'll leave that off. But it's just, it was an interesting thing because, yeah, a lot of them did. Now there were people who didn't have it that rough at home and were just like being assholes because they could. And I know them, and I always wonder what they were like, became like as adults. I don't know, but there were definitely people who just had it really rough, and probably looked at me and saw that I had good clothes, and and was cared for, and kind of resented it, and it just it's so hard. It's really hard, and so I just I had a I've talked to other kids who were from the same era, and saying, we can kind of forgive that, and they say, "Man, that's really hard. That's
I
hard for
had a
me to
guy
do
who
that."
was a dick to me in high school on the podcast. He's a
Oh
great
wow.
guy.
Oh yeah.
We had a great conversation.
Yeah.
I like him. He's an awesome
Yeah.
guy. It was a
Well,
fun podcast.
and it's kind of funny how some of the friends you have in high school, but then you go to the reunions and you end up hooking up with somebody that you didn't even know that well. And it's like, yeah, how did I not know all this about you? And it's just, it's kind of,
People grow up, people
yeah,
change. They're
yeah,
nuanced. But the idea that we should keep the bullying just
yeah,
because of the benefit that it leads down the road is just ridiculous.
right.
That's there's so many hoops you have to jump through to make it out of that okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I had different experiences too. I had this kid in high school who was just a reactionary. And it was, I mean, it was like I got into arguments with him, political arguments. I was politically active when I was 15, and and so he objected to it. 10-year reunion, I'm like dreading, oh God, here I'm gonna have this conversation. He was to my left at that point. He'd gone to Brazil, seen a whole bunch of stuff, started reading a bunch of stuff, and completely changed his politics over 10 years. I'm like, really? He's like, you're playing with me, aren't you, with what you're saying? And he's like critiquing me because I'm like being too liberal, quote unquote, and not radical. I'm like, okay, this this doesn't compute. It was just it's really interesting the journeys that we go through, and the rest. But it's just but good for anybody for changing their mind about stuff, even if it's in if it's in a different direction. And to me, it's like as long as if you're honestly trying to seek the truth, if you come up with different conclusions than I do, then great. Maybe I can learn from them. Maybe not. Maybe you're missing something, or something you're not considering, and but the problem is a lot of our views, our social life is wrapped in it. We have our individual cliques and people that we hang out with, and so can we change our mind, and still maintain those relationships with my friends? They all know that, hey, right, he can change his mind in a moment's notice, so I'm known as that, right? So it's just, I mean, all things reconsidered. That's the theme of my show. I like to find people who have what we consider to be contradictory positions. Environmentalists who support nuclear power, a lot of them, by the way. Younger generation socialist who was completely slammed the Castro, Cuban administration, Marxist, but said, but that regime is completely, you know, um, different things that you don't expect, to come from a particular person. That interests me more is when you don't fit into a box. I want to understand the framework of your thinking and the way you do it. If you don't have a strict party line, I find that more interesting. Okay, but there's got to be some consistency, right? There's some structure to what you're thinking as to why you're so different. Left wingers, a lot of left wingers are opposed to gun control. You don't want the government to be the only one that has guns. That's I learned that my very first show for All Things Reconsidered, um, was um, was that most of the people living in the hills down there, they're all left wing hippies, but guns, they have to have them out there, for a number of reasons, and they also don't want the government telling them, they can't have it. And they say, I don't like the NRA, they're nuts, but I do agree that that the part of liberty is being allowed to own such a gun responsibly. And it was an interesting situation because it's much different from the left wingers I knew in the city, who were, when I knew African American activists saying we're fucking flooded with guns in our need to do something about it. The drugs came in the early 70s, followed by a wave of guns. People before that fought gangs wars with switchblades, and not as many people were killed. Now it's guns, and it's fucking crazy. It's like a river of them coming through here. So different perspectives of gun control, and it's actually one of the issues where I've got some ambiguity on that. I was raised believing in very strict gun control. I would have banned handguns after John Lennon was killed, right? I'm not in that position anymore, because, I was exposed to people who thought differently and listened. But I still think that if gun manufacturers and distributors are deliberately playing to a market where guns end up in the hands of people in the streets, and it's leading to a lot of deaths, and they're deliberately exploiting that market, the black market, and there's ways you can do it. I do think they should be held accountable. If there maybe there should be a way that if a box of guns doesn't get sold the right way, and they're looking the other way and not making sure of it, that they could be sanctioned. So I'm not entirely. But that puts me different with Bernie Sanders, however, who doesn't think that you should be able to sue gun manufacturers for the impacts of guns in there. But he comes from Vermont and is listening to a lot of people in a rural area, and that's why Clinton tried to use his ambiguity in the gun control issue against him in the Democratic primary, even though it would have probably played to his benefit in the general. And it's just that's one issue, for instance, where there's a lot of ambiguity, and then you talk about, well, we all want gun control. What form should it take, and what can we do about this? And it's anyway. I mean, as it was something when I was a kid, in high school. I considered myself to be a Marxist Leninist. I said, but I want to do it the right way and not the way the Soviet Union did. Right, being a Trotskyist gets you out of that because no Trotsky. this government has ever been in power. That'd be a contradiction almost, because Trotskyism believes that there needs to be permanent revolution that spreads worldwide before you can have any socialism, right? So that's an easy way to cop out. So you don't have to be responsible for the governments that are generated probably by the model of partly of centralized thinking. Or democratic centralism, as it's called. And that was, I rejected it by the time I was like senior in high school. I was completely different. Read a book by a gentleman by the name of Milo von Gilas, who wrote the last class, which was about, and I've got that title wrong, but it was and he was a socialist chronicling all of the bad stuff that was happening in Yugoslavia at the time. He was jailed, and the rest, even though he was a socialist. So I read that, decided I wasn't a Marxist Leninist anymore, and this is more interesting to people who have a background in having been in communist or socialist movements. But there was a split in the early 20th century between what became known as the Second and Third Internationals. Karl Kautsky headed up the Socialist International. Lenin ended up leaving it and starting what was called the Third International, and that became the Communist movement, and the Second International became the Socialist movement, or and now Social Democratic movement, and the rest, and started establishing mixed economy models throughout Europe and now throughout the world. And but it was kind of funny because there's always been this term, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And right wingers will say, yeah, that shows they want a dictatorship. Marx said it right then and there. More nuanced historians will say, well, the term dictatorship at the time Marx was writing it didn't really exist in the political sense of the 20th century. We didn't have dictatorships that operated in the way that we associate with the term. He was talking about dictatorship in terms of the working class will dictate the future, blah blah blah, a more nuanced position. And so you've got right wingers saying, and Kautsky endorsed that position, that he wasn't talking about a literal dictatorship. So you got the right wingers saying, no, obviously it means a literal dictatorship. And then Lenin, in his essay, The Renegade Kautsky, why he was writing why he thought that Kautsky was selling out socialism, says, of course it means a literal dictatorship. So you got Lenin in agreement with the conservatives, and the social democrats themselves say, no, that's not what it means. And it was kind of funny because when I started to explore the conservative ideologies in the late 80s and started to read up on some of their stuff, there are similarities that they have with the hardcore Marxist Leninist movement that they don't share with the more liberal elements. I mean, kind of more black and white type of certain types of thinking, and they agree. Yeah, it's got to be a dictatorship. Lenin thinks it's a good thing. They think it's a bad thing. But Kautsky says we're not talking about a dictatorship. It's a phrase, an artful phrase about something like that. A bad choice of words, but Marx didn't know how the word dictatorship was going to come to be used. I mean, this is just, I get fascinated with these discussions, and how everybody comes at it with their own framework, and you've got these fascinating points of view. But there are ways that you can have people on this side have more in common with this side, and the people kind of in the middle saying it's more complicated than that or more nuanced than that, or and it's just anyway, I don't know how I got off on that, but it's just one of the things I do. I always recommend that people read up on it. Read The Renegade Kautsky. Lenin was a good writer. Of course, you're reading it in translation, but and Kautsky had been kind of a radical, more along the lines of Lenin, but he saw things happening, World War One happening, and the rest, and came up with models that have endured. The Marxist-Leninist model is mostly collapsed. It's in a few countries. I don't even know if you can call Korea Marxist-Leninist. I think it's more feudal, but but um, but the centralized government. But what did Kautsky and that whole movement come up with? It came up with mixed economies, socialized medicine, different type. Which Latin America goes to Europe for their medical. They didn't go to the Soviet Union. Nicaragua, when it had its revolution, went to Sweden, not Cuba or the Soviet Union, for their medical model. Right? You've got a lot of these things going on, and they've endured. They've created the highest standards of living the world has ever seen. We even had some of it here through the New Deal, and the rest, and and Latin America is now adopting it. For tigers of Asia all have socialized medicine. We're the only country that doesn't have that, but we have other things that are embraced in it. And so it's sort of like, I don't want to say necessarily the middle is always right, on it, but I came to sort of conclude when people say, "Are you a socialist?" I always used to answer yes, and I still do answer yes. And I say, but it doesn't really mean very much because we're talking about something on a spectrum. A fire hydrant is socialism. A public library is socialism. The roads are socialism, even if you limit it. But this is again where conservatives and Marxist Leninists agree. They say it's only socialism if it's government control of the means of production. And it's like, well, who decided that? Well, Marx said that, right? But is a road not a means of protection? Tell me how well the economy is going to run without them, right? Those are publicly owned. So you got the means of production there. In fact, almost everything is related to it. So I say, yeah, I'm a socialist. The question is to what degree? Uh,
Well, people want it to be black and white so
yeah,
they can put you into this box,
right.
and then you've got the label and they don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, well, it's just like, what I say is, if I'm discussing having the discussion with a conservative, I'll say, well, you will say I'm a socialist until I point out that Sweden is socialism, and you'll say, no, that's just capitalism with a little bit of liberalism involved. And say, well, liberalism came from Keynesianism, which was mixed economy, but it's the modern version of liberalism. Liberalism before that was capitalism, actually, but it's the but the but, I say you think I'm a socialist, but if I talk to most people who embrace the term, they don't think I'm a socialist, right? Because you 2 agree on what socialism is to some degree. I have a different concept of it, so sure I am. I'm a
When you get
capitalist
to
too.
the extreme fringe ends, and it gets a little more dicey, and people
Yeah.
start trying to hardline what it means, and
Well, it does, and I've told people because socialism is considered utopian. It works great on paper, but it doesn't work great in the real world. Well, the same thing is true of the pure economy. There are people, Ayn Rand, and the libertarians who say if you just leave the economy alone, it'll work like an organic or an organism that just has to flourish on its own, and the less the government messes with it, the better it'll work. It's like that's about as utopian as the most utopian of socialist views. It's great on paper, but anything involving human beings is messy. You've got pure competition, and then one particular company starts to win and dominate the market, and then it changes the rules of the market, and so you need some government intervention to and some supplement and something like medicine probably is best under socialism because the for-profit industry has got a problem. It's got to find a way to make a profit. If the whole population was healthy, it wouldn't profit, right? How we don't have a model for that. So so okay, socialism there, but I don't need socialism for all the plastic trinkets that they're selling. I don't need it for that. Food, questionable. Oil, maybe it would be good if we nationalize oil, but I still, but we would still want to have the incentive to be able to extract it, and whatever. I mean, it's just every situation is different, and so if you say I'm a socialist, I say yes. If you ask me if I'm a capitalist, I say yes. Both. It's
but
I
that's a nuanced position, and a lot
right.
of times when you delve into that socialist realm, people want to exclude the deaths that are attributed to that. They want to say that, "No, we can implement this utopia, it just hasn't been
Yeah,
implemented
it
correctly."
hasn't been implemented
And
correctly.
that's when they
Yeah,
start going crazy. Like, "We
yeah.
could do it so much better. It doesn't have to end this way. We'll just change it." But then they never say how they're
Yeah,
gonna
and
change
the
it and
idea that you
regurgitate
can
ideas.
plan an economy. I mean, you look at Los Angeles. Every day all of these goods pour in, it come out and get sold, and the rest. And to try to plan all that happening, you got to rely on market forces. You can't over rely on them. You got to, sometimes government has to step in and recreate a balance. And in doing that, it might create an imbalance, but you're not going to have a perfect world. There's always going to be. You got to be careful as to how you do it, but you can't not do it just because you've got an idea that you've got this perfect machine of supply and demand, and the elastic curve is not going to solve all the problems. We're human beings. We fuck things up all the time, and we got
Moral of the
to.
story, we fuck things up. If there's
Right.
the
So
potential for it to happen, it's probably gonna happen.
but the balances that have best balances that have been struck that have established the longest lifespans and the highest standards of living, in terms of how much vacation time you have and individual wealth and the rest seems to be the Western European social democratic model, which is being adopted everywhere. Even in the United States, we got a little bit of it. We didn't get as much of it as they did because we've got a different kind of culture, that's making it more problematic to do that. But the New Deal was socialist. You can't say it wasn't. It's definitely intervened. When Reagan screamed that Medicare was socialism back in 1960, he was right. It's socialism, but sometimes it works. And when it doesn't work, you got to be able to adapt and say, okay, that one didn't work, but this one worked. What can we learn from that? And we just, but when everything is framed in political terms, where you're either a socialist or a free market capitalist, and that's what you got, then you got a problem because every country's got its different needs and different ways of working things. Probably the Swedish model wouldn't work. We're a much bigger country. We've got a lot, much different thing. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from it. We can't implement certain things, experiment, and try to come up with it. And we will eventually will have quote unquote socialized medicine, as terrifying as some people think that sounds, because it's just one Obama gets criticized from the left because it was a framework that came out of the Heritage Foundation. Probably would have been supported if Romney had done it as he did in Massachusetts, right? But it changed the nature of the industry. It is now sort of tied in to government equity and regulation and even government involvement with these different things, and it's only going to get more so that way. And the question is, do we do it without it becoming bureaucratic and a mess and useless, or can we evolve it in a way where it's like, okay, that didn't work, but this would work, but we're not in we can't do that because you get Republicans that pass 60 resolutions to overturn it, and then the minute they've got total power in 2016, none of those resolutions came forward again. They stopped because they knew it would be political suicide to kill it. It's there. So knowing it's there, can we have a discussion where you got different people coming in and saying, okay, rather than make everything single payer or everything socialized medicine, let's look at that. Let's look at this. Why can't we import Canadian drugs to undersell the expensive drugs here? Do the private companies really need that money to do experimenting? On
Well,
new
that's the
drugs?
crazy thing. You take something like insulin
Hmm.
and the jacked up price
Yeah,
that is in this country versus if you go to like Australia, it's
right.
a fraction of the cost.
And what the medicine companies will say is, well, we need that money to do research, but other countries are doing research.
And we subsidize
We
some of that research
subsidize it,
with
right?
taxpayer. So we're already paying for the research,
Yeah,
and then you're going to make us pay more for our medicine so we can pay extra
right.
to pay for the
And
research.
there are people who have looked at it and say the majority of those high prices don't go to research. It's
Shocker.
yeah,
How
it's just
I would not have guessed that.
yeah, it's just so stop it.
Yeah.
And that's but look who killed the bill that would have allowed us to have Canadian drugs come in to drive the prices down. It wasn't just Republicans. Cory, what's his name? New Jersey, the African American guy. What's his
Oh, Booker?
Cory
Booker?
Booker? Yeah, Bernie Sanders didn't talk to him for months after
Well,
that.
big pharma has bought out both sides.
Yeah.
You can't just pin it on the Republicans and you
No,
can't just
that's
pin it
right.
on the
You can't. You
Democrats.
can't. It's they've got
That's the one bipartisan
it's one of
stand.
them.
Yeah,
One of a few,
their
but yeah.
pharma's in it.
Yeah, well, also, nobody's gonna cut the military budget even if we don't need it, and nobody's gonna it's
I
just
wanted to ask, what is your stance on Ukraine? Because it feels like
uh,
we are walking down this path, and I
I
don't think people
I'm
understand where it
uneasy.
leads.
I'm uneasy about it. I mean, uneasy about it. I mean, Russia invaded, and we do have to provide some sort of assistance. I'm uneasy about the potential for escalation. If Putin is as crazy as they say he is, that scares me even more. But and I and I would like to have an idea of what they have in mind as the end game. And if
That's the
they're
thing. What where are we go now they're talking about retaking Crimea,
well,
and what would
Biden
we
was
say with
talking about
that?
that, but Zelensky rejected it. Said we can't give up any of our land because and they may have a point. They say we give up Donbass and Crimea, they're going to want more later.
Well, did you hear that? Did you there was this viral video of Zelensky saying that soon American children, American boys and girls will be over there fighting and dying just like Ukrainian
I don't know
children are
what. Yeah,
dying.
and I don't know what the context is, but I know that he.
He is out there selling, I mean,
Yeah,
just going hard,
yeah.
asking for everything, wanting the world.
Well, and that's the thing too, is if we're gonna do it, shouldn't we give them anything? I mean, are we gonna be half-assed, or shouldn't we give them the weapons so that there's parity, technological parity
Yeah,
between
but
the
doesn't
2?
that just escalate so
I
I
don't
mean,
know. I don't know.
what happens when they start crossing the Russian border and bombing?
Well, so and they've done it. They've
There
done
was an
it.
article out the other day
Yeah,
that there
they've
was a
done it.
drone strike or something across the
Right.
border in Russia saying,
No,
"Hey."
they've been doing it. They even sent helicopters in to attack an oil tanker, and they're saying we only attack military targets, but that's how it starts. But no, they're not even hiding the fact that they do that. I don't think Russia is going to really complain too much, but because
I'm not worried about Russia's response. I'm worried
yeah.
about us escalating to the point where we are now fully
Supposedly, we've
engaged.
told them, yeah, well, we are fully engaged in terms of giving them, the assistance. I mean, it's like that.
We are the sole country funding this war.
No, Germany and
Yeah, but
France
if you
and the
take
rest of them,
every
yeah.
other country's contribution, it is
Ours is higher.
minuscule
Yeah,
compared to ours. I
it
mean, if
it
we
is.
pull out tomorrow, Ukraine falls and the war is over.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. Although I don't know, everybody thought Ukraine was going to fall anyway, so I don't know. Maybe they
Yeah,
would.
but does that speak to Ukraine alone, or does that speak to the
It speaks.
effectiveness of our targeting, our
It
weapons,
is
our artillery?
it's a testament to the degree to which corruption just completely depleted the Russian
That's
military.
another element on the Ukrainian side that nobody wants to acknowledge anymore is how corrupt Ukraine is.
Well, they've got their corruption issues, and war is going to bring that out. They're going to be war profiteers,
But there was
but
an article.
but it hasn't come to the fact where they're not effective in fighting.
Yes, but there
Yeah.
was there was an article, I think it was by CBS, maybe last year, and it was some absurd realization that only a fraction of the military aid that we were sending to Ukraine was making it to the front lines of the weapons. I want to say it was something crazy like 40% was actually going where it
Yeah,
was supposed to go.
I don't
And
know. Yeah,
Zelensky huffed and puffed, and I want to say it was CBS, they pulled the article because there was so much
I
backlash
mean,
that, well, we'll just
I
ignore
mean, there
this.
was plenty of corruption within the Allies during World War II. Some companies even filed lawsuits about it and won. So we've got it's I
But
mean, war is the breakdown of
But we're
that.
not keeping track of anything. We're just and now we're gonna funnel it through the World Bank and say, "Oh, they're gonna keep track of it." So,
Yeah, I think I think what the military people are looking at is the results that they've managed to push Russia back. They lose some here, but they managed to hold them at bay and hold them back. And personally, I don't know why. I mean, I don't like I said. If they need the tanks, they should just give it to them. They shouldn't hold back. Oh God, well that way the Russia will think that that's
but then
worse
why
than
hold
that.
back the F-16s?
Well,
Why not just give
exactly.
them that?
Yeah, I mean it's not that simple. You got to train the pilots and everybody. But yeah, right. If you're gonna do it.
But
Right.
that's isn't that
Yeah.
so crazy? Aren't we just asking for escalation? I mean, I would argue we're already at the point
Yeah.
where
Well,
that's what's
I mean,
inevitable.
one of the big reasons that Ukraine was able to hold the Russians off is not the tanks. I actually think that this war is probably going to show that tanks are kind of obsolete. I mean, and people have been talking about
Well,
that
it's
for a
shown
long
that on the
time.
Russian side when they
The
were getting stuck in the mud and
yeah,
just
yeah, but even
picked apart.
Ukrainians have lost a lot of a lot of tanks even to that. Now, the Western shoulder-held missiles, that's the big difference. Those are the ones I mean, you have one of those, and that's more effective than a tank in fighting the military. That's what held them back. That's what took them apart. And according to the experts, that's more important than the tanks. So why is he pushing for the tanks? Is it symbolic? I don't know. Apparently, these Leopard tanks will actually make it easier for them to fight and certain things like that. But I don't. I don't. I'm not a war expert. I'm really not at it. But I always understood that tanks had to have an entourage of infantry to support it, right? To take out people with anti-tank weapons and all that, and you never see either side with them. They're both tanks are just kind of going alone. Is this a bad strategy, or is there something, or is there some strategic reason for it that the trade-offs are that way? I think that you don't want to be in a tank. Period. I mean, the drones
I
are
wouldn't
taking them
wanna
out.
be out there on the front line,
I
period.
wouldn't want to be on it, but I especially wouldn't want to be in a rolling coffin. I mean, it just seems like that.
You're just asking for it.
Right, and they're terrified, and they probably just have already written off that they're probably not going to survive the war if you're on tank detail.
I just don't understand why there is such a push in the opposite direction of peace.
I think part of the problem is that what can Zelensky, what can the Ukrainians offer? If I do think that Russia had an argument for historical right to Crimea, but now that they've made it as a condition of war, they invaded and took it by force, and no guarantee that they're not going to keep moving on it. Zelensky has to be thinking, okay, if I give that up, then in 5 years I'm going to be expected to give this up, and then that up, and that up. I mean that we I think what it is we've learned kind of an extreme lesson from World War II. You let them have Austria through the Anschluss, then Czechoslovakia. It didn't appease anybody,
Yeah,
right?
but we have to take into account, which most people don't like it when you bring it up, the fact and role that NATO played in this.
It certainly wasn't helpful in doing that. They probably should have made it clear that Ukraine
Was
wasn't
off
going to be able to
limits.
join. Yeah, wasn't going to be able to join NATO. To do
Well,
that,
in the coup in 2014 under Obama, like, there are these elements. Yes, Russia at the end of the day invaded Ukraine,
right?
and it was wrong. But the shit that we kept pulling, like
Yeah,
when missiles were
but
going to Cuba.
that regime also had Cossacks coming out and whipping protesters. So would it if the West hadn't been involved, would it not have happened? I don't
Yeah, but
know.
what about, okay, then North Korea? Why aren't we involved in North Korea? Why aren't we involved in the Uyghur movement in China? There are these other instances that we just turn a blind eye to,
Oh,
and then we
I
justify, "Oh, well, we should intervene in
we've
this
done
one."
all kinds of stuff to undermine both of them in the past. I think we don't do it in China because China. I don't think China's ever going to go to war with us. They don't have to. They own us, right?
But
I
what
mean,
about Taiwan?
I don't think they're going to do that either. I don't think they need to. I think they have to bluster to show that they're tough, but I don't think they really want Taiwan. Taiwan is selling them, the technology they're selling us, kind of like Switzerland and Sweden. Nobody invaded Sweden during World War II because everybody bought their steel, right?
But what about the cozying up that's happening now, where China might be supplying arms to Russia?
You know, it I would have been surprised if they hadn't been. I thought that would have been reported last year that they were doing it. It's it's a national. It's sort of a chess game. I think that China probably has an interest in keeping that war going. It keeps it
Just like we do.
just like we do, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just it takes pressure off of them and the rest. North Korea is a different situation. It's pretty hard to get any. There's no room for a movement in there right now. That's not happening.
Well, and they have nukes, which is the fear with Iran right now is I read an article, they're
But not
12
only
days
that,
away
they've got total social control
of the
of
public.
of the public. I mean, it's just it's Orwellian in the classic sense. It's of 1984. It's almost literally.
I'm just terrified that this continually escalates because our leadership is poor, the leadership everywhere is poor. We're just
It's
gonna hit this peak where
I
now it's World War
I don't
III.
think so. I think what's going to happen eventually is that there's going to be some type of negotiated settlement where both sides can claim victory.
But
Um,
is there any situation where Putin can do that and come out unscathed?
I think he screwed himself. I think he's
So
screwed no matter what.
if you back a tiger into a corner,
Yeah.
the option is to kill it or get bit.
Unless he can find some other way to claim victory. I imagine, what can he do that doesn't involve actual giving of what can he accept that doesn't involve Ukraine actually giving up territory, maybe access to the Black Sea ports. I think they had it, but they can just say that they have it. And, you can proclaim anything in there and do that. I think the war will come to an end. We've seen this before: Afghanistan, Vietnam. We've seen this before. It comes to an end, then something else starts. This is just and people are going to die, and the economy will suffer. for quite a while. I mean, what they've created in the Ukraine is these are probably going to be the best pilots in the world at this point, the most experienced, the ones that are surviving. I mean, they're surviving with less advanced planes, and they're still, and they're still taking down or doing whatever it is they need to do against Russia.
But
So,
again, I believe we're the ones supplying most of the targeting data. So, like, we are so engaged in this war.
probably just like just like we always give intelligence to the people that we want to
We
support.
want.
Yeah, it's just that's the way it is, and I don't think Russia can complain about it because they do the same. Certainly the Soviet Union did.
But at
I
what
mean, the
point?
Soviet Union, they didn't send their troops in to fight us in Vietnam, but they definitely made it difficult on us.
Yeah, but there this is right up against Russia's border. There's a big difference between going to Vietnam or going to
Yeah, it's
Afghanistan and
it's
waging a
probably
proxy
more
war.
comparable to Cuba, but that was back when it mattered how close missiles were. I mean,
Well, yeah, now hypersonic tech.
right?
But
It doesn't.
they have been adamant that Ukraine is a hard stop, and NATO has continually pushed that.
Yeah. I I don't know. I know that Biden was trying to push in December a framework that involved giving up territory, but Zelensky says we no way we are ever going to do that.
Well, did you read Seymour Hersh's article
No, I did.
about the Nord Stream pipeline?
Seymour Hirsch.
Hirsch, Pulitzer
Oh, about
Prize.
whether Norway was involved
No,
and
that
all that.
we blew it up.
R-
That
r-
it was
y-
us.
Well, through somebody in Norway. Yeah, I heard that. I haven't read it. Everybody sends me the link. I haven't read it. I I look at who has to benefit. I know that Russia benefited in the sense that they wanted to cut off natural gas to the west, but they didn't want to get their subsidiary companies in the west to be sued for breach of contract. So something like that happens. I
Yeah,
d-
but that was their point of leverage over the West, over
I
Germany.
think they just didn't want to be supplying them at
Yeah,
that
but
point.
I mean, we had the most to gain from that. You had Biden in the coming months say the
Not
Nord Stream pipeline will end if Russia
No,
invades.
there was 2 pipelines that they were talking about. There was the pipeline that it was the oil pipeline I think you're talking about that did get shut down, that the Biden and the United States have been trying to shut down for years, and our oil companies, by the way, didn't want it. And that's different. This was the natural gas
No, I
line.
believe he was talking about the Nord Stream pipeline,
I
that
don't
if
think
Russia invaded, it was over, that they were going to
all
shut
right, I
that
know
down.
he said that about the other pipeline that they were in the position of finishing. That was a different situation than this one. I think Biden wanted natural gas to get in so that it wouldn't put pressure on the coalition.
No, but I would argue he wanted them off of Russian dependence and
It,
wanted to be dependent on us.
but
Let's
not
engage in
that,
this war.
but not that quickly. I mean, we're kind of lucky that the winter in Europe is a lot warmer than it was going to be because they were worried about the coalition being frayed because of the pressure of that. I don't think they wanted it to happen when it did. I think eventually they want Russia to not be, giving them so much dependence, but I don't think they benefited. And that's not to say they didn't do it. I mean, you could miscalculate, but I don't think they would benefited from that because if natural gas was going in the whole time and Russia was making money off of it, then there wouldn't have been the pressure on in some countries to pull out of the coalition, and there is that kind of pressure. So it's just I think that Russia had more to gain from it. That's not to say that it wasn't a miscalculation. Just because you got intelligence, doing things doesn't
I
mean
think
they're
we did
doing it
it.
right.
I think we did it.
You did?
I think there's a reason they're withholding the report, and Russia's the one that's calling for it to be outed. I think we had the most to gain by separating Russia from the West and eliminating that dependence on natural gas.
it's a theory. I don't know.
But is that if
Uh,
say we did do it,
then
is
that
that an act of war?
oh,
Does that now turn us into
I would I mean, is that an act of war? I don't know, but it's certainly something that should piss all Europeans off. I mean, they should not want to have anything to do with the United States after that. I mean, that's so there's definitely reason. I don't know. I to me it seems. I mean, I know Seymour Hersh is a Pulitzer Prize
very
winner.
accredited
Yeah,
journalist?
but they also like to have their big splash articles. So, it's just and the rest. I'll have to read it. I've had a bunch of people sending me links to it, and I've seen a lot of mixed reviews on it. So I
I mean,
should
it's all conjecture outside of reading the article. I would yeah, you should check that out.
right.
We'll have to do another one of these. We'll have to get David in here next time
There
to
you go.
use, see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to catch up on the other
The Twitter file
yeah, the
stuff.
Twitter file stuff. Again, I'm skeptical. I mean, I don't have a problem believing that the government does things. But over the years, I've kind of become a little bit more skeptical of conspiracy theories. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I definitely believed the CIA killed John F. Kennedy because why else would they be covering it up? Later on, I concluded that they were probably covering up their incompetence and letting it happen. Right? I don't. I think that maybe there was a second gunner. The trail went cold, and they knew that Americans just wouldn't accept that, but they couldn't do anything about it, so they covered crap up.
I think
But
they killed him. I think they killed him too. Maybe I'm
there
a
you
little
go.
too
I
biased
you know
anti-government, but
it was I mean I remember watching JFK and
the magic bullet, I mean, you hear that and it's just like,
that's right.
come on,
I think there was definitely a second gunner.
come on.
But
And the reason they're still withholding the files, they don't
uh,
want to put them all out. I believe they released
because
some,
I
and then
think there was definitely a cover up. But
you got to check into the Twitter files, and then we
all
need to
right,
have this conversation
all
again
right.
just to see where, because I would be very
I mean,
interested where your
we've
stance
had
is.
very real conspiracies. The experiment on soldiers,
The problem is a lot of those conspiracies, especially now, are turning out to be true.
right. No. I mean that was true. That was proven true. We did experiment. There were medical experiments on soldiers during warfare, which was totally illegal. And why there wasn't a complete revolution after that, we don't know. But did the CIA kill JFK? Did the or some elite group or something like that? Did the companies that Martin Luther King were organizing unions against have him killed and make it look like it was just a lone nutcase? And my mother even says that. He says, notice in every other country, when a political figure is killed, it's presumed assassination. But in this country, it's always some lone wolf crazy person, right? I mean, it's just now we never have a political assassination in this country, right? And then so it's definitely a point. And there were rumors that JFK was going to pull out of Vietnam entirely, for instance, that there were reports coming on. They didn't like that, other stuff where they were mad at him for Bay of Pigs because he didn't provide the air support. And or whatever. I mean,
Well, the
but
Governor Whitmer case. Did you hear about that? That of the
uh,
10 guys that were planning, I think it was 10,
uh
that were planning to
oh,
kidnap her,
there
8 of
were
them were
there
FBI.
that there were, well, I don't know about eight, but it was
It was all but 2, I believe. So whatever the
I think
total
more
number
than that have
was
been convicted.
in the Whitmer plot.
Yeah, I think more than two have been convicted. There were two of the four have been convicted, but I think other people have been convicted in subsequent trials. So I don't know. So it doesn't.
Maybe I'll have to dive back into that. I
Yeah, and
believe
and
for sure a
four of them
majority
were
were
charged.
FBI guys.
Four of
I'm
them
gonna
were
have to dig
charged.
back into that.
Two of them were acquitted, and two of them were convicted. Of four of them were charged, and I thought there were other cases around that too that were still pending. But I don't
I'll
know.
have to
We'll
check
see.
into that one again.
Yeah, I don't know, but
Well, regardless,
there were
there's some shady
definitely
shit that goes down.
people in there, and we know that people do infiltrate that, and the question is, did they was it entrapment? And
That's the key question.
yeah, and we ran into that with COINTELPRO in the '60s. Have you ever watched? I believe the movie is called. It's a docudrama actually called 1971.
Mm-mm.
Okay, you can find it on, I think on PBS, but it's on. It's about a group of pacifists who broke into the FBI headquarters in 1971, and that turned out to be the COINTELPRO thing that did it, and the government was involved in all kinds of stuff. Then, I mean, they weren't just monitoring the left wing groups; they were breaking up peace movements. I mean, doing everything from spreading rumors that somebody was having an affair to break up a power couple that had organized a whole thing, and that whole chapter of whatever the peace group was collapsed, right? I mean, bizarre things like that.
Well,
And
wasn't that the story around MLK? Was it the CIA or the
oh,
FBI
it was the
often?
FBI. Hoover hated his guts, but this was people actually infiltrating the movement and to undo it as a political movement, not to control it so that it didn't crime didn't come out of it, but actually that the mission, the FBI mission, was to make sure that the anti-war movement was ineffective or try to. And this group broke in to a base, and it's like a whole Mission Impossible thing how they did it. And finally, in 2011, when all of the statute of limitations had run, they came out with their story, and it's put into this. It's a documentary, but they have actors in it too, playing certain parts of it, and it's fascinating. They didn't catch up with them. They actually had them arrested at one point, but didn't know who they were. They were. I mean, it's was and but the FBI at that point was so incompetent they weren't catching anybody. They didn't catch the weatherman. The weatherman ran circles around him, right? So it's just and they got so frustrated they started doing things like hanging guy out the window to try to get information out of him. What that ended up doing was poisoning all the evidence, so that Weatherman's lawyers said, "Okay, come on in out of the cold. I can get you deals." From this, and they never caught up, and there was the Hoover was livid that they never caught up with this group in particular who busted in the FBI and stole all these files. It's just simply called 1971. Look for it. It's
I'll have to
fascinating.
watch that.
Yeah, it's and COINTELPRO was a whole program of Hoover trying to destroy the peace movement. I mean, it wasn't that, oh, there's criminals in there and we want to keep watch of them, anybody who wants to become a radical. They actually wanted to destroy the peace movement, and that's what they did. Under the guise of, well, we're keeping them on their toes so they can't do anything crazy like blow the arm off the Statue of Liberty, which was an entrapment thing. I don't know if you ever heard of that whole thing, but yeah, there was a group that was trying to do it, and it was like the Michigan thing where and half of them were at least informants, if not actually.
It's a scary thought. 'Cause it does happen, and the
My,
question is just how much there are people that say that happened with the BLM
my
protests, with January 6th, that a
My
lot of it was
parent well,
FBI
there
driven.
was some interesting stuff that happened during the BLM protests, but my parents were convinced that Eldridge Cleaver was an agent way back then. He was in jail for cocaine. You read about it in a great book that he co-wrote with his attorney slash lover, Beverly Axelrod, Soul on Ice. But he got a deal. All of a sudden, here he is, this guy facing practically life in prison, gets out of a cocaine charge, and it's really vague as to why they let him go. He comes into leadership in the Black Panther Party. All of a sudden, Huey Newton, H. Rap Brown and Bobby Seale and all the other leaders are arrested, and there he is, and he leads a ambush, a gun, actual guns of against the Oakland police, and somehow he doesn't end up in jail. He did later on end up in jail. I think they had to make it obvious, and he left the country and all that kind of stuff. And then, a few years later, he comes out of prison, going around tour, wowing the Rotarians about his tales of his radical past and how he's a right winger now, born again Christian, blah blah blah. And the interesting thing is that didn't surprise my parents or a lot of people who were active at the time. They thought it was really strange that he was allowed to be out. All the other leaders were there when everybody knew he was the one who organized that ambush of the police that I think somebody was actually killed in, and the rest. And the belief, I don't know what I think about it. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but my parents think maybe he was if not an agent, an informant. Hey, you can get out of jail if you do these things for us.
A lot of the conspiracy theories are
Yeah,
not turning out to be conspiracies
right. No,
anymore.
it's
It's very uncomfortable.
it is, and there definitely were plenty of people. Have you had a chance to watch the trial of the Chicago Seven?
No, I haven't, but I have been watching The World at War. I
Oh,
watched that. You
that's yeah,
recommended that. That was
yeah.
really
It
good.
is
That
really
was
good.
incredible.
Well, that's good because they got him at right age after a lot of people are coming out of being, having shell shock and the rest, but young enough to remember things freshly. It's just the perfect time. That's why it'll probably always be the best documentary on that, and very interesting perspective. Some American people are pissed at it because it didn't make America be the center of attention of the whole war. It focuses on a lot of different other things like that, and but it was, yeah, it just was well
Well
written.
done.
Yeah, it was just really well done. Well, the trial of the Chicago Seven. There's a point where Abby Hoffman, who did a stand up thing during the trial, says, "And I call this phase of the trial with friends like these," and it talks about the informants, and several of the informants came to testify at the trial, and that people who are acting like they were activists.
Do you know who Ray Epps is? Have you heard of that name?
I've heard of the name, but
This guy from the January 6th stuff, and
uh-huh,
he was outside of the Capitol screaming that people should storm the Capitol building and we need to get in there.
uh-huh.
And there are videos of people in the crowd screaming back at him that he's a Fed.
Oh, interesting.
Fed, Fed, and he's just walking through the crowd.
Well, that's what
And of all the January 6th people, this guy's fine. He was never called in, he never had to testify, was never asked any questions, just nope.
I'll have to look it up. I know that that there is a guy who they claim was a Fed who's been terrorized and the rest is in hiding because of it. So I don't know. I don't know if it's the same guy or not. But
The fact that they can do that and it's just get off scot free. The FBI scares me a little bit. When
yeah,
you think about Waco, when you think about Ruby Ridge,
yeah. Well,
and
sometimes people get off by turning in buddies. That's happened during the McCarthy era.
true,
People you could get in by naming names, so to speak. Victor Navasky, who died just a few weeks ago, actually was the editor for Nation for years, wrote an excellent book on McCarthyism in Hollywood, in particular, called "Naming Names." How some people, there were the blacklists, as you've heard, and they were their careers were in jeopardy. Actually, ended some of them, and but you could get out of it by going in and naming people that were your friends who you knew to be
rat
active,
him out.
and the rest. And it was a performatory exercise because usually the government had all the names anyway. But if you did this, it was part of a ritual that showed that you were rejecting these people and the movement. And yeah, it's excellent book that he wrote about it because it just created a whole dichotomy. Forgetting the name of the director who did On the Waterfront. For some reason, why am I not remembering his name? Anyways, he was a person who named names. He was a person who probably could have killed the blacklist. Kazdan, Lawrence. Is it I always get him mixed up between the guy who wrote the Star Wars episode. Anyway, I think it's Kazdan. I'm probably getting that wrong, but he and Arthur Miller, who was a playwright famous for The Crucible and Death of a Salesman and the rest, had been working on a movie that was going to be about a guy who was killed on the waterfronts because he was an informant against gangsters, right? And there was a point where they went to Hollywood and somebody wanted to change it to communists rather than gangsters. But the irony there is on the West Coast, you didn't see um, any of the gangster influence because the radicals kept them out of the Longshoremen Union. But on the East Coast, it was completely taken over at one point, and they were doing a movie about this. And Arthur Miller said, "Fuck that! I'm not going to do this. You're rewriting history to play into this stuff." So he walks away, and but, Kazan, sorry, Kazdan is the one, is Elia Kazan is the one who did, On the Waterfront, and On the Waterfront eventually came out of it, and it turned out to be a justification for snitching, right? And Arthur Miller sent him a play called, View from the Bridge, which was a different perspective on snitching. Guy who snitches is outcast, I think even killed at the end. He gets jealous of a woman who's falling in love with an immigrant, and then he turns him in. And and he sends Kazan the manuscript and says, and the guy saying, "Well, you got yourself blacklisted. I can't do this." And he says, "Oh, I didn't want you to produce my script. I just wanted you to know what I think of snitches." I mean, this is, what happened. These were people who were good friends. They actually did have a reconciliation later when Miller was on his deathbed. But it was just, but these were two big shots. Arthur Miller married to Marilyn Monroe. A lot. of stuff going on. But this was the thing: was Miller could have gotten out of off the blacklist at any time by coming in and doing what Kazan had done. The Hollywood 10, they made the mistake of not taking the Fifth Amendment. They took the First Amendment, saying you don't have the right to ask me these questions, and they got themselves blacklisted and jailed, held in contempt, and the rest. Good movie is Trumbo. Um, it is. I think maybe a little bit oversimplified. Trumbo was kind of more dogmatic. It makes him look more kind of enlightened liberal than he was. He was more kind of communist dogmatic, but he did a great book, Johnny Got His Gun, and the rest. I mean, really good author. But there is a play of a famous confrontation between him and John Wayne, who was completely behind the blacklist, and the rest, and Ronald Reagan, who basically got his career started by turning in. He'd been the head of the Screen Actors Guild, and he said, "Oh yeah, we name names like crazy." And all of this. Forget why we veered into this topic, but there were a lot of informants, and it's one thing to have an agent that is pretending to be an activist going into a group, but the other method is to get somebody that you've got leverage over to go in, somebody maybe already trusted to go in and inform and maybe even manipulate.
Well, and the agent gets v even more uncomfortable when they're the ones instigating it, and then
Right.
they just pass it off at the 12th hour to whoever and then arrest that person.
Yeah. No. And I think two of the four were acquitted because of entrapment. I could be wrong on that, but I think that and entrapment is basically when you make something so enticing that it wouldn't have happened if you didn't do that, right? It basically it recognizes human weakness to that extent. If you put some heroin out on a stoop and somebody comes who's addicted and grabs it, so that you can go nail them, that's entrapment, because maybe they wouldn't go out of their way to get it, but since it was right then and there, you make it more likely that they're going to do these things. And so if they were if these FBI agents were central to the planning, they could probably do it. But two of them, the same jury didn't acquit another two of them. So I haven't read it to
For
know.
the Whitmer case?
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to look back
yeah,
into that one.
two of them were convicted. It was all four of them were on trial, and two were convicted and two were acquitted. And I believe that the two got off on entrapment, but the other two had their involvement in it had been so involved even before the entrapment stuff came up that they said, no, you don't have that as a defense. I but I'm just going from vague memory. I didn't read the
Yeah, I
articles on
thought
it.
it was a majority of FBI informants or FBI agents that had basically set up the whole thing, and then
It
these
it
guys just roped these guys into doing it.
It may be, it may be that the 2 people were starting to set something up and the FBI agents moved it along, and so the jury might have figured, well, those 2 were gonna do something anyway,
Tied.
regardless of what the FBI agent did. I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at the case, but, it's just I can only read so much. It's just
That is the problem.
it's right now I'm reading Albert Speer's, Inside, Third Reich. Strongly recommend it.
I'll have
Yeah,
to check that out too.
yeah, he wrote it after he was convicted. I think he was in jail for 10 years. He wasn't, one of the worst of the Nazis, but gave it respectability because he was, upper class guy, professional, um, and the rest. But yeah, I'm sort of fascinated with a good writer. I'm reading it translated from German, of course, but he, yeah, died in the late 60s. I'm not trying to remember, but you don't like the guy even when he's writing it. I think he's in denial about stuff, but what he's writing about is how you get drawn into a Nazi movement like that. It's fascinating.
I'll check it out.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right, well, Eric,
Yeah.
this was fun as always, man. I
All
had a
right.
great time.
Yeah.
Do you want
Thanks.
to plug all your stuff where people can find
Sure.
you? Redwood Wonk.
Redwood Wonk, you can see on channel 12 at different various times. I believe Tuesday and Thursday at 7 o'clock. And you can also hear it on KZSC. No, I think it is KZSC. Boy, it's been so long since I've said it. But on the Access Humboldt um, radio station, I do that, and then I also on KMUD do Monday Morning Magazine on the third Monday of morning. of every month, along with Julia Minton, and I do All Things Reconsidered on the third Thursday of the month at 7 o'clock. I compete with myself because my recorded self competes with my live self on Thursday, on that Thursday on that. But and I do with Dave Frank is usually my partner on Redwood Wonk. He's brilliant, and we do do these things together, and then but sometimes we'll have other people when one of us can't make it on there. So it's do a little bit of a sometimes a rotation. But anyway, so and if anybody wants me to cover a certain subject, they can reach me at redwoodwonk@gmail.com. They can reach me there, or they can reach me on my email address at ericvkirk@gmail.com. I'm public about that address, but make sure you get the V in there because erickirk@gmail.com is this conservative guy on the East Coast who's tired of getting my political emails. So make sure you get the V in that name.
Okay, well,
All
Eric,
right.
thanks, man. This was a
Thank you.
blast.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you.